the roar of 20,000 fans, the blinding arena lights. A larger-than-life hero standing tall in the center of the ring while an entire arena goes absolutely wild. Wrestlers weren't just athletes, they were cartoon characters come to life, comic book heroes and villains battling for supremacy on Saturday morning television and pay-per-view events that families gathered around like the Super Bowl. This is the history of the WWF Golden Era. First up, Roddy Piper.
Roddy Piper was one of the most hated wrestlers in history. He could make entire arenas want to kill him just by walking to the ring in his kilt with bagpipes. But here's the thing nobody talks about. Despite being the biggest heel in wrestling during the 1980s boom, he never once held the WWF Championship, not even for a day. This wasn't an accident. There were backstage politics, power plays, and decisions made in boardrooms that kept the belt away from wrestling's most compelling villain. What turns a 13-year-old kid into one of wrestling's most feared villains? For Roderick George Toombs, the answer started in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, where his childhood was anything but normal. His father, Stanley Baird Toombs, worked for the Canadian National Railway Police, but that badge and uniform couldn't protect young Roderick from the chaos at home. The family moved constantly across Canada as his father's job demanded transfers from one posting to another. By the time he was a teenager, Roderick had been constantly relocated between many schools. School became a battlefield for him. He didn't fit in anywhere, and he didn't want to. Teachers saw him as a troublemaker. Other kids saw him as the weird new guy who would probably be gone in a few months anyway. He got into fights regularly, and his grades suffered. The constant moving meant he never formed lasting friendships or learned how to trust people. At 13 years old, he was expelled from school for carrying a switchblade. That was the moment his childhood officially ended. His father kicked him out of the house after the expulsion. Roderick found himself living in youth hostels across Western Canada, bouncing from one city to another with nothing but the clothes on his back. He slept in train stations, under bridges, and anywhere else he could find shelter. He learned fast how to survive on the streets, dumpster diving for food and panhandling for change. Some nights he went to bed hungry. The anger that would later make him famous started building during those months on the street. Every day was about survival. Every person he met might try to take advantage of him or hurt him. He developed a hard edge that most people don't get until they're adults, if they ever get it at all. The pain wasn't just physical from sleeping rough or going without food. It was the emotional pain of being abandoned by his own family when he needed them most. Boxing gyms became his refuge during this period. He discovered he had natural fighting ability and trainers who were willing to work with him. The discipline of boxing gave him structure that had been missing from his life. He claimed amateur boxing success, including golden gloves in interviews. A claim often repeated but not confirmed in tournament lists. He also trained in judo, learning grappling techniques that would serve him well later. These weren't hobbies for him, like they might be for other teenagers. These were survival skills. His first wrestling experiences came when he was still a teenager, training in Canada and working with promoters like Al Tomko. His early AWA work put him in the ring opposite veterans like Larry Hennig, and he later worked with trainers including Gene LeBell and Leo Garibaldi. These mentors saw something in the angry young man that others might have missed. Roderick had legitimate fighting skills from his boxing and judo training, but more than that, he had an authenticity that most wrestlers spend years trying to fake. When he got angry in the ring, it wasn't an act. The other wrestlers noticed this right away. Most guys who came into wrestling had to learn how to make their emotions bigger and more dramatic for the crowd. Roderick's problem was the opposite. He had to learn how to control his real anger so it didn't get him arrested or banned from arenas. His early matches were raw and sometimes dangerous because he hadn't learned how to work safely with opponents while still maintaining that edge that made him special. His experiences sleeping rough had taught him how to read people quickly and accurately. He could spot weakness or fear in opponents before they even knew they were showing it. He learned how to use psychological warfare as effectively as any physical move. The other wrestlers were often older and more experienced, but most of them had never faced genuine hardship like he had. They were playing tough guys. He actually was one. What made him different from other wrestlers with hard backgrounds was his intelligence. He wasn't just a street tough who could throw punches. He studied how crowds reacted to different things he said or did. He watched other wrestlers' promos and matches, learning what worked and what didn't. He began to understand that his real-life pain and anger could be his greatest weapons if he learned how to channel them properly. During his youth, he had also learned to play bagpipes, a skill that seemed unrelated to wrestling at the time. But like everything else from his difficult past, it would eventually become part of his arsenal. The authenticity that came from his brutal upbringing became his calling card. When he cut promos talking about being tough or surviving hard times, every word carried weight because audiences could sense he had lived it. His difficult childhood wasn't just backstory for his wrestling character. It was the foundation that everything else would be built on. The anger, the survival instincts, the ability to read people and situations quickly, the legitimate fighting skills, and most importantly, the authentic edge that made audiences uncomfortable. He had all the raw materials needed to become wrestling's most hated villain. But having the tools and knowing how to use them were two different things entirely. Portland Wrestling became the laboratory where Piper built his villain act. Promoter Don Owen ran the Pacific Northwest Territory with a tight ship, but gave wrestlers freedom to experiment with their characters as long as they could generate heat. Piper found himself in the perfect environment for learning what made people truly angry. The first thing he discovered was that being genuinely disliked was actually a valuable skill in wrestling. Most wrestlers spent their careers trying to get fans to cheer for them, but someone had to be the bad guy, and there was serious money in making people hate you. The more they hated you, the more they would pay to see you lose. It was backwards logic that made perfect sense in the wrestling business. His breakthrough came when he started incorporating his Scottish heritage into his character. He began wearing kilts to the ring and playing bagpipes during his entrance. The crowd reaction was immediate and violent. Fans in Portland didn't just boo him. They threw things at him. They screamed death threats. They tried to climb over the guardrails to get at him. The bagpipes were particularly effective because the sound was so annoying that it made people angry before he even started wrestling. The kilt and bagpipes weren't just costumes and props. He turned them into weapons for psychological warfare. He used the bagpipes as purposeful provocation, part of his routine to rile crowds. He used the kilt and staged gestures to push conservative crowds past their breaking point. Every detail was calculated to make people uncomfortable and angry. He watched other wrestlers' promos and learned the psychology of crowd manipulation. Some wrestlers tried to be scary, others tried to be arrogant. Piper realized that the most effective approach was to be genuinely irritating. He developed a speaking style that was part Scottish accent, part street smart punk, and completely annoying. His voice had a nasal quality that cut through arena noise and got under people's skin. His tag team partnership with Rick Martel gave him a chance to learn from a technically superior wrestler while developing his character work. Martel was a gifted athlete who could make anyone look good in the ring. Working with him taught Piper how to pace a match and build drama. They won multiple Pacific Northwest Tag Team Championships together, establishing Piper's credibility as both a performer and a draw. The success was always secondary to the reaction they generated. Crowds would get so worked up during their matches that security had to be increased. Fans would wait outside the arena after shows, hoping to confront them. The local newspapers started writing about the wrestlers as if they were real criminals, rather than entertainers. Portland Wrestling became his laboratory for testing what made audiences truly angry. He tried different approaches in different towns to see what generated the strongest reactions. In some places, insulting local sports teams worked best. In others, making fun of local politicians got bigger heat. He learned that the key was finding whatever people cared about most and then attacking it without mercy. His mic work during this period was fearless in ways that shocked even other wrestlers. Most heels would insult the crowd in generic ways. Piper would get specific and personal. He would research local news stories and work them into his promos. He would make fun of local tragedies or economic problems. Other wrestlers thought he was taking things too far, but the crowds proved them wrong with their passionate hatred. Wrestling magazines started writing about him as one of the most hated wrestlers in the country. Other promoters began calling Don Owen to ask about booking him for their territories. His reputation for generating genuine heat was spreading beyond the Pacific Northwest. Wrestlers from other regions would visit Portland shows just to watch him work and try to figure out what made him so effective. He was creating something entirely new in wrestling. Most heels relied on standard tactics, like cheating or making fun of local sports teams. Piper had developed a character that was so thoroughly irritating and offensive that audiences forgot they were watching entertainment. They genuinely wanted to hurt him. That level of emotional investment was exactly what wrestling promoters were looking for. The other wrestlers backstage started treating him differently. Some were jealous of the attention he was getting. Others were genuinely impressed by his ability to manipulate crowds. A few were actually afraid of him because they weren't sure where the character ended and the real person began. His reputation for unpredictability became part of his appeal to promoters who wanted something different from their main event heels. Portland wasn't just where Piper learned to wrestle. It was where he learned to weaponize hatred and turn it into the most valuable commodity in professional wrestling. But his education in villainy was about to take a much more dangerous turn. The skills he had perfected in the Pacific Northwest were about to be tested in ways that would leave permanent scars. His next challenge came in Jim Crockett Promotions, where the competition was tougher and the stakes higher than anything he had experienced in Portland. This was serious wrestling territory with television coverage that reached millions of homes across the southeastern United States. His arrival in Mid-Atlantic wrestling put him directly in the path of Greg the Hammer Valentine, already established as one of the territory's top heels with legitimate amateur wrestling credentials and wrestling royalty bloodlines as Johnny Valentine's son. Their rivalry started over the NWA United States Heavyweight Championship. Valentine held the title and saw Piper as an upstart from the Northwest who didn't belong in his territory. Piper saw Valentine as everything he hated about wrestling establishment figures who thought they were better than street fighters like him. Neither man was willing to show weakness or give ground to the other. Their matches became increasingly violent as each tried to prove he was tougher than his opponent. The feud escalated when Valentine injured Piper's ear during one of their encounters. He used a move that drove his elbow directly into Piper's ear with unusual force. The injury was real and serious, causing immediate pain and hearing problems. But instead of backing down or taking time off to heal, Piper used the injury to fuel his anger and make their rivalry even more personal. He started cutting promos about how Valentine was trying to end his career and destroy his livelihood. Valentine played his part perfectly, claiming that he was going to finish what he started and put Piper out of wrestling permanently. He would target the injured ear during every match, applying submission holds that put pressure on the damaged area. The crowds could see that Piper was in genuine pain, which made them more invested in seeing him get revenge. This wasn't fake wrestling drama. This was real violence being used to sell tickets. The build-up to the dog collar match at the first Starrcade in 1983 was unlike anything wrestling had seen before. Both men would be connected by a steel chain attached to dog collars around their necks. There would be no escape and no way to avoid punishment. The match was designed to be the final chapter in their brutal rivalry. Wrestling fans across the country knew they were about to witness something special and violent. The dog collar match itself lived up to every bit of hype that surrounded it. Connected by the chain, both men used it as a weapon to choke and beat each other. They fought all over the arena, not just in the ring. The chain left marks on both wrestlers as they used it to slam each other into ring posts and barriers. Blood flowed freely as the match turned into something that looked more like a real fight than sports entertainment. During the match, Valentine broke Piper's eardrum. The trauma from the chain and Valentine's continued targeting of the area caused permanent damage that would affect his hearing for the rest of his life. Piper later lost roughly 50 to 75% of his hearing in that ear. This wasn't a storyline injury that would heal after a few weeks. This was real damage that he would carry with him forever. Instead of ending his career, the injury became part of his legend. Wrestling fans and other wrestlers saw what he was willing to sacrifice for his craft. The ear injury proved that his toughness wasn't just an act or part of his character. He was genuinely willing to risk permanent physical damage to put on a show for the fans. This reputation for real toughness made other wrestlers respect him and fear him at the same time. His wars with Ric Flair during this period showed another side of his abilities. Flair was the complete opposite of Valentine, a technical wrestler who relied on psychology and showmanship rather than pure violence. Working with Flair taught Piper how to adjust his style to different opponents while maintaining his edge. When Piper beat Ric Flair for the NWA United States Heavyweight Championship, it established him as a main event player in one of wrestling's most competitive territories. He defended the title against top wrestlers from across the country and proved he could carry a major championship. These matches elevated him from regional star to national sensation. Wrestling magazines started featuring him on covers. Other territories began making offers to book him for their biggest shows. His reputation for generating heat and delivering in big matches made him one of the most sought-after wrestlers in the country. The ear injury proved Piper would sacrifice his body for his craft, and it made him more dangerous than ever. His willingness to work through real pain and injury showed a level of dedication that impressed even his harshest critics backstage. This reputation for authentic toughness caught the attention of Vince McMahon, who was always looking for wrestlers who could handle the pressures of national television and create moments that would shock audiences beyond anything they had seen before. McMahon found exactly what he was looking for when he signed Piper to the WWE in 1984. Television was becoming crucial to wrestling success, and McMahon needed programming that would keep audiences watching between matches. He created Piper's Pit as a talk show segment where Piper would interview wrestlers and celebrities in a cheap studio setting with fake plants and a cheesy backdrop. Piper was perfect for hosting because his natural ability to irritate people could turn any interview into a confrontation within minutes. The segment launched without much fanfare, but McMahon knew they needed a moment that would shock audiences and create mainstream attention. Wrestling was trying to break into popular culture beyond just wrestling fans. The setup came when Jimmy Snuka was booked as a guest. Snuka was one of the most popular wrestlers in the company, a high-flying performer from the Pacific Islands. Piper arrived at the studio with a bag of coconuts as props, telling the production crew he was going to demonstrate the hardness of Snuka's head by smashing them. Everyone assumed this was typical Piper showboating. The cameras started rolling, and Piper began making insulting comments about Snuka's background and intelligence. He started smashing coconuts with his bare hands, making jokes about how they reminded him of Snuka's head. The audience was already uncomfortable with the racial undertones, but then Piper grabbed one of the broken coconut pieces and smashed it directly into Snuka's skull. Snuka went down like he had been hit with a baseball bat. Blood started flowing from his head immediately. The attack looked completely real because in many ways it was. Piper had used a real coconut as a weapon and caused genuine injury. The studio audience went silent before erupting in boos and screams. Some people tried to rush the set to help Snuka or attack Piper. The aftermath generated more heat than most wrestlers created in their entire careers. Wrestling fans were outraged by the apparent brutality and racism of the attack. Mainstream media picked up the story as an example of how violent and offensive wrestling had become. The WWE received hundreds of angry phone calls and letters demanding that Piper be fired or arrested. But the controversy was exactly what the WWE needed. The coconut incident became the most talked about moment in wrestling that year. It established Piper's Pit as must-see television and proved that the WWE could create moments that transcended the wrestling audience. Every wrestling fan in the country wanted to see what Piper would do next. Piper's Pit became the template for all future wrestling talk show segments, influencing later shows like Chris Jericho's Highlight Reel and The Miz's Miz TV. Other promotions started creating their own interview segments hosted by heel wrestlers. The format of having a controversial host interview guests in a setting designed to create conflict became a standard part of wrestling television. Other memorable moments on the show kept audiences coming back week after week. Piper would insult local sports teams, make fun of other wrestlers' personal lives, and create situations that led to brawls and destruction of the set. Each segment was designed to advance storylines while generating maximum heat for upcoming matches. The segment elevated both Piper and his guests to new levels of fame within the wrestling industry. Wrestlers who appeared on Piper's Pit automatically became more important in fans' minds. Being chosen as a guest was seen as a sign that the company had big plans for a wrestler. The The show gave wrestlers a platform to build their characters through confrontations and interviews, rather than just in-ring action. Piper's ability to generate controversy and mainstream attention made him invaluable to McMahon's expansion plans. His talk show segment proved that wrestling could create compelling television content beyond just matches. The format allowed for character development and storyline advancement in ways that traditional wrestling programming couldn't match. The success of Piper's Pit demonstrated that Piper wasn't just a wrestler who could work matches. He was an entertainer who could carry television programming and generate the kind of mainstream buzz that McMahon needed for his national expansion. His natural charisma and ability to create controversy made him perfect for the bigger stage that wrestling was about to enter. The Coconut Incident and the ongoing success of Piper's Pit established him as one of wrestling's most valuable performers. He had proven he could generate heat, carry television segments, and create moments that people would never forget. His villainous charisma was becoming essential to the WWE's plans for something much bigger than anyone in wrestling had ever attempted before. WrestleMania 1 was a make-or-break moment for Vince McMahon's national expansion plan, and it all depended on whether people would pay to see Piper lose. By 1985, McMahon had spent millions of dollars buying out regional promoters, signing their biggest stars, and putting everything on cable television. But the whole scheme would collapse if he couldn't prove that wrestling could draw mainstream audiences willing to pay premium prices for live events. The WWE's national expansion strategy was built around the rock and wrestling connection with MTV. McMahon understood that wrestling needed to break out of its traditional audience to survive. MTV was the perfect partner because it reached exactly the demographic he wanted: young people with disposable income who weren't already wrestling fans. The music television network was looking for programming that would generate controversy and keep viewers watching. Wrestling provided both. The entire future of wrestling hinged on the success of the first WrestleMania at Madison Square Garden. McMahon had invested everything he owned and borrowed millions more to finance the event. If it failed, he would lose his company and probably go bankrupt. Other wrestling promoters around the country were watching and hoping he would fail, so they could keep their territories safe from his expansion. The pressure was enormous. Piper's central role in the main event alongside Paul Orndorff against Hulk Hogan and Mr. T made him the key to the whole operation. The match was designed around celebrity involvement to attract mainstream media attention. Mr. T was one of the biggest stars in entertainment at the time because of the A-Team television show. But having celebrities in wrestling matches was risky because they couldn't actually wrestle and might embarrass everyone involved. His feud with Hogan had been building for months through Piper's Pit segments and other WWE programming. The War to Settle the Score aired on MTV and helped build the Hogan-Piper storyline before WrestleMania, drawing huge ratings and proving wrestling could succeed on cable television. Hogan was the all-American hero, Piper was the abrasive antagonist, a contrast MTV-friendly mainstream audiences could easily pick sides on. The involvement with celebrities brought mainstream credibility that wrestling had never experienced before. Piper was central to many of these crossover moments because his character was easy for non-wrestling fans to understand and hate. The success of WrestleMania changed wrestling forever by proving that the business could attract mainstream audiences and generate massive revenue from pay-per-view events. The event sold out Madison Square Garden and drew significant closed-circuit television audiences around the country. More importantly, it established wrestling as legitimate entertainment that could compete with other major sporting events for audience attention and media coverage. Piper's villainous charisma didn't just help WrestleMania succeed. It created the template for wrestling's mainstream future, where controversial characters and celebrity involvement would become standard elements of major events. His work as the primary antagonist proved that wrestling needed great villains, just as much as it needed heroic champions. But despite headlining the event that launched wrestling into the mainstream and proving himself as one of the industry's biggest draws, something was missing from Piper's resume that should have been automatic for a star of his magnitude. The WWE Championship remained out of reach, despite every indication that Piper had earned it. By 1986, he had proven himself as the most effective heel in wrestling history. He had main-evented WrestleMania, revolutionized wrestling television, and generated more heat than any wrestler of his generation. Fans packed arenas specifically to see him lose. His merchandise sold despite him being the villain. Every metric that mattered in wrestling showed he was ready for a championship run. But the WWE Championship never came. This wasn't an oversight or booking mistake. Piper never held the WWE Championship during his peak years in the 1980s, creating one of wrestling's most notable anomalies. Despite his massive popularity and proven drawing power, the title remained off-limits. The decision came from the top of the company and reflected backstage considerations that had nothing to do with his ability or fan support. Wrestling insiders knew something was happening behind the scenes that kept the title away from one of the company's biggest stars. 3 documented factors likely contributed to keeping the championship away from Piper. First, Vince McMahon's booking philosophy centered around having controllable, media-friendly champions who could represent the company in mainstream appearances. Hulk Hogan was perfect for this role because he stayed in character, followed company guidelines, and never created controversy outside of scripted storylines. He was reliable and predictable in ways that made McMahon comfortable, putting him in front of corporate sponsors and television executives. Second, concerns about Piper's unpredictable nature and outspoken behavior created problems for McMahon's vision of mainstream success. Piper had a reputation for speaking his mind, regardless of company policy or political considerations. He would go off script during interviews and create situations that made corporate partners nervous. His later controversies, including an HBO interview that WWE used as cause for his release in 2003, demonstrated the kind of unpredictable behavior that made him risky as a flagship champion. Third, occasional behind-the-scenes conflicts reinforced McMahon's reluctance to give Piper more power within the company. Reports and backstage accounts indicate that Piper's independent streak and willingness to challenge authority created tension. McMahon valued loyalty and predictability in his champions. He wanted wrestlers who would follow company direction without question and represent the WWE according to his vision. The company's expansion into mainstream entertainment required champions who could appear on talk shows and corporate events without creating controversy. Piper's interview style was designed to generate heat and make people angry. This worked perfectly for building wrestling storylines, but it could backfire in mainstream media appearances where controversy might hurt business relationships. McMahon needed champions who could turn the heel act off when representing the company outside wrestling contexts. However, the championship snub wasn't universal across promotions. Piper did hold other meaningful titles that demonstrated he was trusted with major belts elsewhere. He won NWA United States Championships during his time in Jim Crockett Promotions and later captured the Intercontinental Championship in 1992. His multiple United States title reigns in JCP and WCW showed that other promoters saw him as championship material. This adds nuance to the snub narrative and suggests the issue was specific to McMahon's vision for the WWE's top prize. Other wrestlers and industry insiders viewed the obvious snub as evidence of backstage politics that had nothing to do with wrestling ability. Veterans who worked with both Hogan and Piper knew that Piper was just as capable of carrying the company as champion. His matches drew money and his storylines kept fans interested. The fact that he never got the opportunity, despite his obvious qualifications, created resentment among wrestlers who felt politics trumped merit. Wrestling journalists and industry observers began writing about the championship snub as an example of how business considerations sometimes overrode wrestling logic. Fans started questioning why their favorite heel never got rewarded with title runs, despite being more entertaining than many champions. The situation became an open secret within wrestling circles that McMahon's booking decisions were influenced by factors beyond just drawing power and fan reaction. Business considerations ultimately outweighed wrestling merit in championship decisions. The WWE was trying to become a mainstream entertainment company that could attract corporate sponsors and television deals. Having an unpredictable champion who might say something controversial could jeopardize these business relationships. McMahon chose safety over excitement when it came to his top championship. Piper's championship snub revealed the politics behind wrestling's biggest prize. The championship went to wrestlers who fit McMahon's vision of what a champion should be, rather than who fans most wanted to see win it. This policy showed how business considerations could override wrestling logic, even when it meant leaving money on the table. His success would have to come from other areas of entertainment, where his unpredictable nature might be seen as an asset rather than a liability. Hollywood became the proving ground where Piper's unpredictable nature finally paid off. Most wrestlers who try acting end up embarrassing themselves. Piper became a cult icon. By the late 1980s, his wrestling career had reached its peak, but the championship snub left him looking for new challenges. Hollywood offered an opportunity to prove his talents extended beyond the wrestling ring. Most wrestlers who made the transition to movies failed spectacularly, becoming punchlines rather than legitimate actors. The entertainment industry viewed wrestlers as muscle-bound performers who couldn't handle real acting demands. Director John Carpenter was working on a science fiction film called They Live and needed someone who could convincingly play a blue-collar drifter who discovers an alien conspiracy. The role required an actor who looked tough enough to be believable as a construction worker, but could also handle dialogue and carry dramatic scenes. Carpenter had seen Piper's work on television and thought his natural intensity might translate well to film. Wrestling fans and movie critics both expected him to fail as an actor when news of his casting broke. Wrestling had a terrible reputation in Hollywood circles. Movie executives saw wrestlers as cartoon characters who couldn't handle serious dramatic work. Critics assumed They Live would be another cheaply made action movie designed to capitalize on wrestling's popularity without any real artistic merit. His preparation for the role surprised everyone involved in the production. He approached acting with the same dedication he brought to wrestling, studying his character's background and motivations. He worked with acting coaches to improve his delivery and learn film techniques that were different from wrestling promos. The other actors on set were impressed by how seriously he took the craft and how willing he was to take direction. They Live was released in 1988 and featured the famous line, "I have come here to chew bubblegum and kick ass." And I'm all out of bubblegum. His character's declaration captured audiences' imagination and became one of the most quoted movie phrases of the decade. The line was delivered with perfect timing and showed he had natural comedic timing that nobody expected from his wrestling persona. They Live became a cult classic that elevated his profile beyond wrestling into mainstream entertainment culture. The movie's themes about media manipulation and hidden control structures resonated with audiences who saw it as commentary on American society. His performance as the working-class hero who fights against corporate conspiracy made him a legitimate action star. Critics who expected to dismiss his acting were forced to admit he had genuine screen presence and later acknowledged him as a cult icon. His other film work included Hell Comes to Frogtown and a string of B-movies and TV roles that turned him into a cult actor. He approached each project with the same professionalism he showed in They Live, building a resume that proved his acting success wasn't just luck. His natural charisma translated well to different types of entertainment, making him a valuable performer for various projects. He balanced his entertainment career with periodic returns to wrestling, using his Hollywood credentials to negotiate better deals and more creative control. His acting success raised his mainstream profile and gave him crossover credibility that helped him negotiate returns and shaped how promoters viewed him. Wrestling promoters who had previously dismissed him as just another wrestler now saw him as a legitimate entertainment personality with crossover appeal. Television work became a regular part of his schedule as producers discovered he could handle both dramatic and comedic roles. He appeared on popular shows as both guest star and recurring character, proving his acting range extended beyond action movies. His entertainment success changed how wrestling promoters viewed him when he made return appearances. Instead of being seen as just another wrestler looking for one more payday, he was now a proven entertainment commodity with value beyond wrestling. The success in Hollywood proved that wrestlers could be legitimate entertainers if they had the right combination of natural talent and professional dedication. Other wrestlers began following his path into acting, though few achieved his level of success. He had broken down barriers that existed between wrestling and mainstream entertainment, proving that athletic entertainers could succeed in other areas of show business. He had created a template that others could follow, showing that wrestling could be a stepping stone to broader entertainment success rather than a dead-end career. But even with Hollywood success under his belt, Piper wasn't finished with wrestling. The ring kept calling him back for battles that would test more than just his acting skills. His later career became a battle against time and his own body's limitations. By the mid-1990s, Piper was approaching his 40s, and decades of punishment were taking their toll. His knees ached from countless matches, his back hurt from taking bumps on concrete floors and steel chairs. The hearing loss from his ear injury years earlier was getting worse, but he wasn't ready to retire completely from the business that had made him famous. Age and health issues began affecting his ability to perform at his previous level when he signed with World Championship Wrestling in late 1996. WCW was trying to compete with the WWE by signing established stars who could draw television ratings and pay-per-view buys. Piper still had name recognition and the ability to cut promos that generated heat, but his in-ring work was noticeably slower than it had been during his prime years in the 1980s. His World Championship Wrestling run gave him opportunities that had been denied during his World Wrestling Entertainment peak. He debuted in late 1996, feuded with Hogan and the NWO, briefly served as on-air commissioner, and had several high-profile matches and angles through 1999 before leaving in 2000. The Monday Night Wars between WCW and WWE meant both companies were desperate for star power and willing to push older wrestlers in ways they might not have considered during normal circumstances. His feuds with Hulk Hogan took on new meaning in WCW because both men were older and their careers were winding down. Their matches lacked the athleticism of their younger days, but made up for it with storytelling and the history between the characters. Fans who had watched their rivalry in the WWE during the 1980s were interested in seeing how their story would continue in a different company with different circumstances. Piper beat Hogan in a non-title Starrcade main event, a big win on paper, but not an actual world title change. The victory came more than a decade after most people thought he deserved a major championship run. While he was past his physical prime, the high-profile win proved he could still draw money and generate interest from wrestling audiences. His role as WCW commissioner allowed him to stay involved in wrestling storylines without having to wrestle full-time matches that his body could no longer handle effectively. The position gave him authority over other wrestlers and let him use his promo skills to advance storylines and create television drama. It was a natural fit for someone who had always been better at talking than most wrestlers were at wrestling. His continued involvement in wrestling through mentoring younger wrestlers gave him purpose during his later years. He worked with wrestlers like Virgil and Sean O'Haire, who wanted to improve their promo skills and learn how to generate heat from audiences. His knowledge about psychology and crowd manipulation was valuable to wrestlers who had athletic ability, but lacked the verbal skills that had made him famous. Controversial moments and backstage incidents throughout his later career showed his uncompromising nature hadn't softened with age. His 2003 HBO interview created problems with WWE management, who cited the interview and concerns about self-destructive behavior as reasons for his release. He still spoke his mind about wrestling politics and wasn't afraid to criticize decisions made by promoters or other wrestlers. Some people in the wrestling business found his outspokenness refreshing, while others thought he should have mellowed with age. His reputation as someone who always spoke his mind, regardless of political considerations, sometimes created problems with wrestling promoters who preferred wrestlers to follow company lines without question. He had opinions about wrestling booking, business practices, and industry politics that he shared whether people wanted to hear them or not. This honesty made him respected by fans, but sometimes difficult for promoters to work with. His diagnosis with Hodgkin's lymphoma in 2006 forced him to confront his own mortality in ways that wrestling injuries never had. Cancer was an opponent that couldn't be defeated through toughness or determination alone. The disease required medical treatment and lifestyle changes that were completely different from anything he had faced during his wrestling career. He finished radiation treatment on January 15, 2007. His openness about his health struggles surprised people who expected him to keep private matters to himself. Instead of hiding his cancer battle, he spoke publicly about his treatment and the challenges of dealing with a life-threatening illness. This honesty about his health problems showed a vulnerable side that audiences had rarely seen during his wrestling career, when he projected invincibility and toughness. Even when his body was failing, his mind and mouth remained as sharp as ever. The cancer treatment weakened him physically, but didn't affect his ability to cut promos or analyze wrestling storylines. He could still generate heat from audiences and create memorable moments, even when he couldn't perform at his previous athletic level. His final years proved that his greatest weapon had always been his ability to make people feel something through his words and presence. When Roddy Piper died in his sleep on July 31, 2015, at age 61, the wrestling world lost more than just a performer. They lost the blueprint for what a wrestling villain could be. Medical reports cite cardiopulmonary arrest caused by hypertension, with a pulmonary embolism listed as a contributing factor. His death shocked everyone because he had seemed to be recovering from his cancer battle and was still making occasional appearances. His WWE Hall of Fame induction in 2005, inducted by Ric Flair, had already cemented his legacy before his passing. WWE held a 10-bell salute on Raw, and many top stars, including The Rock and Ric Flair, publicly paid tribute to his influence on their careers. Piper didn't get the WWE title, but he rewrote what a villain in wrestling could do, with Piper's pit, showmanship, and real risk roof-raising promos that still shape heels today.
Next up, Paul Orndorff. Paul Orndorff was one of Hulk Hogan's greatest rivals during the Golden Era. He went from being a standout football player to becoming Mr. Wonderful, the man who headlined the first WrestleMania. But after years of sacrifices and concussions, the effects of CTE would take their toll on Mr. Wonderful. And in 2021, doctors gave Paul devastating news. His time was running out. In 1949, Paul Parlett Orndorff Jr. was born in Brandon, Florida. The Orndorff were a working-class family. Every dollar came from hard work and long hours, something young Paul learned early on. While other kids in Brandon might have dreamed of easy success, Paul's childhood taught him that nothing comes without effort. Picture Tampa in the 1950s and 60s. Hot summer days and Friday night lights. But the star who would later dominate wrestling rings started as the smallest kid on the block. Young Paul Orndorff wasn't born with natural size or strength, but he had something more powerful: pure grit that ran bone deep. When Paul first stepped onto a football field, it wasn't just about playing a game. He'd be the first to arrive at practice and the last to leave, turning the Florida sun into his personal training partner. While his classmates saw practice as something to get through, Orndorff saw it as something serious. He attacked the weight room like a man possessed, treating every rep like it was his last. Teachers and coaches would often find him running extra drills alone, long after everyone else had gone home. The other players started noticing something different about Paul. He was smaller, but he hit harder, ran faster, and simply wanted it more than anyone else. The New Orleans Saints picked Paul Orndorff in the 1973 NFL Draft. The Saints thought they had found a player who could do it all. But Paul was starting to hear the call of the wrestling ring, even as he practiced with the NFL. The path wasn't straightforward. He tried playing for the Chicago Bears, but things didn't click. When he got hurt playing in the World Football League, some might have seen it as bad luck. But really, these setbacks were just pushing Paul toward what he was meant to do. Everything changed when his father-in-law helped him get into wrestling. In 1976, fans at Mid-Southern Wrestling saw Paul for the first time. He didn't start small. He went right after the biggest name there, Jerry Lawler. It was like lighting a fire in the arena, and Paul knew he had found his place. Just a year later, in 1977, Paul was already wearing championship gold. Winning the NWA Southern Heavyweight Championship showed everyone that he wasn't just some football player trying to wrestle. He was a natural star. When he moved to wrestle in the tri-state area, he found himself fighting the mighty Ernie Ladd. They had amazing matches, and Paul even won the North American Heavyweight title twice. What made Paul special wasn't just that he could wrestle, it was how fast he got good at it. While most new wrestlers took years to learn, Paul seemed to know what to do right away. He wasn't just good at wrestling, he was changing it, helping create a new era in the sport that would last for years to come. In his early wrestling days, Paul became a star in the National Wrestling Alliance. His fights with the masked superstar were so fierce, people started calling him the Brandon Bull, remembering his football days. By 1979, he was on top of the world, winning the World Tag Team titles with Jimmy Snuka. He kept winning in Southeast Championship Wrestling too, taking tag team gold with partners Dick Slater and Norval Austin. The year 1980 saw Paul make Mid-South territory his home, and that's where he really caught fire. He had a wild rivalry with Ken Mantell that ended with someone losing their hair. Then he shocked everyone by turning bad after Jake the Snake Roberts won the North American title that Paul wanted so badly. But Paul got his way in the end. On July 4th, 1981, he won that title himself. His time as champion wasn't quiet. He fought some of the biggest names around. The $1 Million Man and Dusty Rhodes gave him some of his toughest fights. But it all went south when his friend Bob Roop stabbed him in the back. Their friendship turned into one of the nastiest fights in Mid-South, and by early 1982, Paul had had enough. He packed his bags and left Mid-South behind, ready for something bigger. The thing about Paul was that he didn't just wrestle matches. He told stories in the ring. Every fight meant something. Every title had a purpose. When he was a good guy, fans loved him. When he turned bad, they hated him just as much. He could make people feel something just by walking into the arena. His matches with the $1 Million Man weren't just wrestling. They were like watching a movie where you didn't know who would win. Those years taught Paul everything he needed to know about being a star. He learned how to work a crowd, how to make people care, and most importantly, how to leave them wanting more. Each territory he wrestled in made him better, smarter, and more ready for the bright lights that were coming his way. Little did anyone know, but Paul Orndorff was just getting started. Paul's return to Georgia Championship Wrestling lit up the whole territory. His fights with Buzz Sawyer were so intense that when he finally won the National Heavyweight Championship, the fans went wild. He even gave up the title for a shot at Ric Flair's World Championship. That's how badly he wanted to be the best. When that didn't work out, Paul came back for his old title. He had crazy matches with the Super Destroyer and the Masked Superstar, trading the belt back and forth. But then Larry Zbyszko played dirty, using Killer Tim Brooks in a sneaky plan that cost Paul his championship. Looking for new fights and bigger crowds, Paul headed to Japan in 1983. There, he took on the best wrestlers Japan had, guys like Riki Choshu and the legendary Antonio Inoki. He even teamed up with the giant Big John Studd, making quite a name for himself overseas. Then came the moment that would change everything. Paul walked into the World Wrestling Federation. But he wasn't just another new guy trying his luck. He was Mr. Wonderful now, full of confidence and swagger. On January 23, 1984, he stepped into Madison Square Garden, the most famous arena in wrestling, and beat Salvatore Bellomo. Just like that, Paul Orndorff was a main event star. What made this time special wasn't just the wins, it was how Paul carried himself. He wasn't playing a character anymore. He had become something larger than life. Every time he walked to the ring, fans knew they were seeing someone special. The way he moved, talked, and fought, it all screamed superstar. That first match at the Garden wasn't just a win. It was Paul Orndorff announcing to the world that he had arrived at the top of wrestling, and he wasn't going anywhere. When Paul stepped into the WWF ring, he wasn't just wrestling. He was putting on a show. Every move he made told a story, and when he grabbed the microphone, people couldn't look away. His biggest early story came when he teamed up with Roddy Piper, and that's where everything changed. It was Piper who first called him Mr. Wonderful, a name that would stick forever. Together, they weren't just bad guys. They were the kind of villains that fans secretly loved, even while booing them. Then came the big one, a match that would change wrestling forever. Paul and Piper took on the biggest stars around, the famous actor Mr. T and the mighty Hulk Hogan at the very first WrestleMania. This wasn't just another wrestling match in some small town. This was Hollywood meets wrestling, with celebrities everywhere and millions watching. Wrestling was growing up, becoming something bigger than it had ever been before. Every time Paul and Piper showed up, they got under people's skin in the best way. They weren't just wrestlers being mean, they were artists playing their parts perfectly. When they walked down the aisle at WrestleMania, they knew they were part of something special. This match wasn't just about winning or losing. It was about showing the world that wrestling could be as big as any other entertainment. What made Paul and Piper so good together was how real they felt. While Hogan and Mr. T were like superheroes, Paul and Piper were like the cool bad guys in a movie. They dressed sharp, talked smart, and made people want to see them get beaten up, but also secretly hoped they'd show up again next week. They weren't just wrestling bad guys anymore. They were helping turn wrestling into the huge show business it would become. That first WrestleMania match helped change everything about wrestling. It brought in new fans, made wrestling cool, and showed that a wrestling show could be as big as any movie or concert. And right in the middle of it all was Paul Orndorff, playing his part perfectly as Mr. Wonderful, helping turn wrestling into something wonderful indeed. The famous WrestleMania match came down to one wild moment. Bob Orton, who was supposed to help Paul win, messed everything up. He tried to hit Hogan with his cast but hit Paul instead. That one mistake let Hogan pin Paul for the win, and everything fell apart after that. Paul was burning mad about losing, but things got even worse. On Saturday night's main event, one of wrestling's biggest TV shows back then, Piper and Orton turned on him. They jumped him and beat him down, thinking they'd taught him a lesson. But they didn't know Paul Orndorff very well. Because later that same night, when they were beating up Hulk Hogan 2-on-1, something amazing happened. The crowd went crazy when Paul's music hit. He ran to the ring like a man on fire, but this time he wasn't after Hogan. He was coming to save him. Nobody could believe their eyes. The man who had been one of wrestling's biggest bad guys was now standing side by side with its biggest hero. The fans went wild, and just like that, Mr. Wonderful had gone from villain to hero in one unforgettable night. This wasn't just another wrestling story. It was like watching someone change right before your eyes. One minute, Paul was the guy everyone hated. The next, he was the guy they couldn't stop cheering for. The way he ran down that aisle, the look in his eyes, the way he fought off his old friends. It all felt real. Because with Paul Orndorff, even when the story was bigger than life, he made you believe every second of it. That night showed what made Paul special. He could make you hate him one minute and cheer him the next, and both felt just as real. His switch from bad guy to good guy wasn't just another wrestling turn. It was the start of one of the biggest stories wrestling would ever tell. When Paul finally broke away from Bobby Heenan, everyone knew things were really changing. It wasn't just another wrestling moment. Paul had picked his side, and he was sticking with it. Now he was fighting alongside Hulk Hogan, the biggest good guy in wrestling, and fans couldn't get enough. Paul and Hogan became an unstoppable team, traveling all over America to fight Piper and Orton. Every city they visited turned into a battleground. While Hogan had to defend his championship against other challengers, Paul took it upon himself to handle both Piper and Orton one-on-one. These weren't just normal matches. They were all-out wars that often ended with both guys still wanting to fight more. The fans who used to hate Paul now couldn't cheer loud enough for him. Every time he hit his finishing move, the piledriver, the buildings would shake with excitement. What made these fights special wasn't just who won or lost. It was how personal everything felt. When Paul fought Piper or Orton, you could feel the bad blood between them. These weren't just wrestlers doing moves. They were telling stories of betrayal and revenge. Night after night, city after city, Paul proved he belonged at the top of wrestling. He wasn't just Hogan's friend. He was a star in his own right. The way he carried himself had changed too. Instead of bragging about being Mr. Wonderful, he was showing it in the ring. He still had that swagger, but now he was using it to fire up the crowd instead of making them angry. This time in Paul's career showed just how good he really was. He could fight the biggest names in wrestling and look like he belonged. Whether he was teaming with Hogan or fighting on his own, Paul Orndorff had become one of wrestling's most popular stars, and he did it by being exactly who he was: wonderful. When Paul fired Bobby Heenan, he made a dangerous enemy. Heenan was so mad he offered $25,000 to anyone who could take Paul out. When nobody could do it, he doubled it to $50,000. That's when wrestling legend Bruno Sammartino stepped in as a referee to keep things fair. But when Piper and Orton started picking fights with Bruno too, he joined forces with Paul, making their battles even bigger. Paul wasn't just fighting Heenan's guys. He was also teaming up with the massive Andre the Giant and taking on tough guys like Don Morocco. But something else was eating at Paul. People started calling him Hulk Jr. Adrian Adonis kept making fun of him, saying he'd gone soft since becoming Hogan's friend. The breaking point came when Paul tried to call Hogan on TV, but Hogan was too busy training to talk. Paul started acting different after that. When he and Hogan were supposed to fight the Moondogs together, Paul wanted to prove he could do it alone. He didn't need Hogan's help. Then came the match that changed everything. Fighting Big John Studd and King Kong Bundy, Paul and Hogan bumped into each other. Paul got hurt and had to leave for a while. When he came back, nobody knew what to expect. Paul walked down to the ring like nothing had changed. Then, in a moment nobody will ever forget, he turned on Hogan. One big clothesline and then his famous pile driver. Just like that, Paul Orndorff had shocked the wrestling world. All those people calling him Hulk Jr. had finally pushed him too far. That moment wasn't just about Paul turning heel again. It was about him standing up and saying he was his own man. He didn't need to be Hogan's friend to be a star. He was Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff, and he was done living in anybody's shadow. The way he did it, the surprise, the violence, the perfect timing, showed why Paul was one of the best at telling stories in the ring. Paul's fights with Hulk Hogan weren't just wrestling matches. They were some of the best stories ever told in the ring. While Hogan was the all-American hero in his red and yellow, telling kids to say their prayers and eat their vitamins, Paul was showing a different side of success. He was the guy who thought he was better than everyone else and wasn't afraid to prove it. When these two fought, it felt personal. It wasn't just about who was stronger. It was about Paul being sick of living in Hogan's shadow. Every time they locked up, you could feel years of built-up anger coming out. Paul wanted to prove he didn't need Hogan's friendship to be a star. He wanted to show that Mr. Wonderful was every bit as good as the mighty Hulk Hogan. Their matches told a story that any fan could understand: jealousy, betrayal, and pride. When Paul hit Hogan with that clothesline and pile driver, it wasn't just another wrestling move. It was him saying, "I'm not your sidekick anymore." The fans who used to cheer both men now had to pick sides, and the buildings would shake with boos and cheers whenever they fought. The way he carried himself, that Mr. Wonderful swagger, stayed the same, but now it meant different things at different times. This made his matches more exciting because you never knew which Paul would show up. He might be the sneaky villain one week, then the misunderstood tough guy the next. Each fight felt different from the last, but they all fit together in the bigger story of who Paul Orndorff was becoming. What made this so special was how ahead of its time it was. While other wrestlers were stuck playing the same character every night, Paul was showing that wrestling could be more like a TV show, with characters that changed and grew. He wasn't just wrestling matches anymore. He was helping change how wrestling told its stories. The late 1980s brought Paul his toughest fight yet, but this time it wasn't in the ring. A bad neck injury had him facing something every wrestler fears: the end of their career. For a guy who built his life around being physically perfect, this hit especially hard. Some thought Mr. Wonderful might be done for good. But Paul tackled rehab the same way he tackled everything else, with pure determination. The same drive that got him through football practice in Tampa, that pushed him to become a wrestling champion, now went into healing his body. Every day was like training for the biggest match of his life, except his opponent was his own injury. When he came back to wrestling, fans saw something different in him. Sure, he was still Mr. Wonderful, still had that confident strut to the ring, but now there was something more. He was proving that nothing could keep him down. Every move he made told the crowd, "I'm still here. I'm still strong." His matches became more than just fights. They were proof that you could bounce back from anything. The way Paul fought through his injury inspired other wrestlers too. Here was one of the toughest guys in the business, showing that even the biggest stars could get hurt, but also showing how to fight back. Even with a bad neck, Paul kept pushing forward. He changed how he wrestled to protect himself, but never lost that fire that made him special. As the 1990s rolled in, wrestling wasn't the same business Paul had started in. The WWF was becoming huge, like a TV show that played all over the world. So Paul headed back to WCW, where he could still be Mr. Wonderful his way. He got into some hard-hitting fights with wild men like Cactus Jack and battled young stars like Dustin Rhodes, showing he could still go with anybody. But Paul was more than just another wrestler now. He was living history. He was one of the last guys around who knew what it was like when wrestling was split into territories, when you had to drive town to town making your name. He'd been there when wrestling was changing from a local attraction into something that played on TV screens worldwide. When fans watched Paul wrestle in the 90s, they weren't just seeing another match. They were watching someone who helped build the wrestling business they now loved. In his matches with younger stars, Paul wasn't just trying to win. He was teaching them what he'd learned over the years. Every hold, every move, every way he worked the crowd came from years of experience. The new guys might have been faster or flashier, but Paul knew things about wrestling that you can only learn the hard way, night after night in rings across the country. Paul Orndorff was like a walking wrestling history book, someone who'd seen it all, done it all, and could still show the young guys how it was done. In 2011, Paul faced his toughest fight yet when doctors told him he had throat cancer. They didn't give him much time, just days to live. Even with a feeding tube keeping him alive, Paul wasn't ready to give up. Just like all those times in the ring, he refused to stay down. When he announced in August that his cancer was gone, it seemed like Mr. Wonderful had pulled off one last amazing comeback. But some battles can't be won with just heart and determination. Over the years that followed, Paul started fighting dementia, a fight that slowly takes away who you are, bit by bit. In 2021, a surprising story unfolded about Paul Orndorff that showed how even wrestling's biggest stars could fall on hard times. It started simply enough. A fan shared a GoFundMe page on Turnbuckle Magazine's Facebook. The page had been set up by Paul's son Travis, asking for help with his father's medical bills. The news shocked many wrestling fans. Paul Orndorff had been a main event star in the 1980s, fighting in the biggest matches and biggest arenas. He'd headlined shows with Hulk Hogan when wrestling was exploding in popularity. If you'd asked fans back then to guess which wrestlers might need financial help later in life, almost nobody would have picked Mr. Wonderful. But this showed a harsh truth about wrestling in those days. Even though Paul had been on top, even though he'd helped make wrestling huge, the money didn't last forever. Medical bills, especially for aging wrestlers whose bodies had taken years of punishment, could eat through savings quickly. The same man who once fought in front of thousands now needed help from those same fans in a different way. Fans started sharing Travis's GoFundMe everywhere. The wrestling community, known for taking care of its own, began spreading the word. This wasn't just about helping an old wrestler. This was about helping Mr. Wonderful, someone who'd given his body and his health to entertain fans for years. The campaign showed how wrestling had changed too. In the old days, when a wrestler needed help, it would happen quietly, maybe through other wrestlers or small fan clubs. But social media let Travis reach out to wrestling fans everywhere, showing them that even someone as wonderful as his dad could need their help sometimes. When the GoFundMe campaign details came out, they painted a heartbreaking picture. Paul Orndorff, Mr. Wonderful himself, was 3 years behind on his property taxes and needed help buying medicine. Even worse, if he couldn't pay those taxes by September, he'd lose his home to the bank. Many fans couldn't believe it at first. Paul was known for being smart with his money, not someone who'd waste the millions he made wrestling. But then the real story came out through Brian, who explained what had drained Paul's savings. It wasn't bad spending or poor choices. It was the brutal cost of fighting stage 4 lymph node cancer. The same toughness that made Paul a wrestling star had helped him beat cancer against the odds. But the medical bills had taken everything he had. This was more than just another sad wrestling story. Here was a man who'd done everything right, saved his money, invested wisely, planned for the future. But cancer didn't care about any of that. The cost of staying alive had eaten through savings that should have lasted a lifetime. The same Paul Orndorff, who once main evented WrestleMania, was now at risk of losing his home. The situation showed a harsh truth about life in America. Even being a smart, successful star didn't protect you from medical bills that could take everything. The man who'd helped make wrestling a $1 million business was finding out that in the real world, even millions might not be enough when serious illness strikes. For fans, this wasn't just about helping an old wrestler anymore. It was about helping someone who'd been smart with his money but got hit with something nobody could really prepare for. Mr. Wonderful needed help. Not because he'd failed, but because sometimes life throws something at you that's tougher than any opponent in the ring. The wrestling world jumped into action as soon as they heard about Paul's situation. Social media lit up with shares and retweets. Big names in wrestling like Hurricane Helms, Gerald Briscoe, and Rip Rogers helped spread the word. It wasn't just talk. People were opening their wallets to help Mr. Wonderful. The campaign that had only raised $640 suddenly took off like a rocket. Over 200 people stepped up to donate, most of them being regular fans who remembered Paul's matches. But some of wrestling's biggest stars pitched in too. Dallas Page, known for helping other wrestlers in need, contributed. Chris Jericho, one of modern wrestling's biggest stars, showed up to help. Even Afa Anoa'i from the legendary Samoan wrestling family joined in. What happened next was like something out of a feel-good movie. In just over 24 hours, fans and wrestlers together blew past the $10,000 goal. It showed something special about wrestling fans. They don't forget the stars who entertained them. Sure, they might boo the bad guys and cheer the good guys during shows, but when one of their heroes needed real help, they came together like family. The speed of it all was amazing. In about a day, they went from Paul possibly losing his home to having enough money to save it. Social media, which can often be a tough place, turned into a rally point for helping someone who'd given so much to wrestling. The same fans who once watched Paul battle Hulk Hogan were now fighting alongside him against a different kind of opponent. This wasn't just fans helping an old wrestler. It was the wrestling community showing what they're really made of. When one of their own needed help, whether they were wonderful or not, the wrestling family stepped up to the plate. When the money came in, the first thing it did was save Paul's home by paying off those back taxes. But the help meant more than just keeping a roof over his head. It also meant Paul could get the medicine he needed as he kept fighting health problems. The cancer he'd beaten had left him with memory issues, and things got even tougher when doctors found signs of CTE, brain damage that many old wrestlers deal with from years of taking hits to the head. Brian Blair, who knew Paul well, shared some bittersweet news about his friend. "He's healthy," Blair said, talking about how amazed everyone was that Paul beat stage 4 cancer when they thought they might lose him. But beating cancer came with a price. It put extra stress on his brain, which was already dealing with damage from all the concussions he'd taken in the ring. The doctors had found something called tau in Paul's brain, a sign that shows up in people with CTE. It explained a lot about his memory problems. But even with these challenges, they weren't giving up. They were working on getting his medicine right, hoping that upping the dose might help his memory, since his body was still strong, even if his mind was struggling. It was a tough situation. Here was Paul Orndorff, who'd beaten cancer against all odds, still fighting hard like he always did. His body was winning battles, but his mind was fighting a different kind of match, one caused by all those years of entertaining fans in the ring. The money fans raised wasn't just paying bills, it was giving Mr. Wonderful a chance to keep fighting, to stay in his home, and to get the help he needed for both his body and his mind. The whole thing showed something important. The same tough spirit that made Paul Mr. Wonderful in the ring was still there, still fighting, still refusing to give up, even when the fights got harder and the opponents weren't something you could see in the ring. What started as an emergency effort to save Paul's home turned into something even better. While the GoFundMe money helped pay off what he owed, his family did something really smart. They fought for and won a tax exemption. This wasn't just a quick fix. It was a long-term solution that cut his future property taxes by 75%. This big drop in his tax rate meant the money fans donated would stretch much further than anyone first thought. The funds raised wouldn't just save his home for now. They'd keep Paul's home safe for the next 4 years under this new, lower tax rate. What started as a crisis turned into stable ground for Mr. Wonderful to stand on. The family's work in getting this tax exemption showed the same kind of fighting spirit Paul was famous for. They didn't just solve today's problem. They looked ahead and found a way to make tomorrow better, too. Instead of needing another fundraiser next year, Paul could rest easier knowing his home was secure for years to come. This wasn't just about money anymore, it was about giving Paul peace of mind. After all his health battles, after beating cancer and dealing with CTE, at least he wouldn't have to worry about losing his home. The wrestling community hadn't just helped their hero once. Thanks to this tax break, their help would keep protecting Paul for years. The whole story, from the urgent call for help to the long-term solution, showed how the wrestling world takes care of its own. Fans and fellow wrestlers didn't just throw money at a problem. They helped give Mr. Wonderful something wonderful, the security of knowing his home was safe for years to come. But even with all the love and support from fans who rallied to help him keep his home and get his medicine, Paul Orndorff's final battle came to an end on July 12, 2021. He was 71 years old. His last years showed the same fighting spirit that made him a wrestling legend. When cancer tried to take him down, he kicked out at 2.5, just like he'd done so many times in the ring. But dementia was different. It was an opponent that played by its own rules, one that even Mr. Wonderful couldn't overcome. The way Paul fought his health battles touched many people. Other wrestlers talked about how tough he was, fighting cancer when doctors had counted him out. Even in his final years dealing with dementia, he kept that spark that made him special. He might not have been the same Mr. Wonderful who lit up wrestling rings, but his courage never changed. In 2005, wrestling's biggest company gave Paul its highest honor, a spot in the WWE Hall of Fame. This wasn't just another award. It was proof that Mr. Wonderful had helped change wrestling forever. The fans who cheered and booed him over the years now stood to celebrate everything he'd given to the sport. Paul showed everyone that wrestling wasn't just about who won or lost. It was about telling stories that made people feel something real. When he strutted to the ring, flexing and calling himself Mr. Wonderful, he wasn't just showing off. He was showing what someone could become if they believed in themselves enough. From that small kid in Tampa to one of wrestling's biggest stars, Paul lived out a story of changing yourself into something greater. Every time Paul stepped into the ring, he taught fans and other wrestlers something important. Wrestling works best when it feels real. Whether he was Hogan's best friend or worst enemy, teaming with Piper or fighting him, Paul made you believe every second of it. He didn't just do moves, he made you care about why he was doing them. Don't miss our other documentaries about the incredible legends who defined wrestling in the 80s. Next up, King Kong Bundy. At over 450 pounds, King Kong Bundy moved like a man half his size. At his peak, this monster demanded referees count to 5, because 3 seconds wasn't enough to prove his total dominance. But in 2019, the walking condominium would face his final opponent, and this time, not even a 5 count could save him. In 1955, Chris Allen Pallies was born in Woodbury, New Jersey. Growing up, Chris was always bigger than most kids his age, but he wasn't just big. He was a natural athlete who dominated in amateur wrestling, winning 2 regional championships before graduating in 1974. After high school, Chris headed to Larry Sharp's Monster Factory Wrestling School in Belmar, New Jersey, the place where giants were made. On March 7, 1981, he debuted in the World Wrestling Federation as Chris Kanyon, scoring his first victory against Strong Kobayashi 4 months later. But it was in Texas, with world-class championship wrestling, where Chris Pallies would transform into the legendary King Kong Bundy. Chris Pallies started out as Big Daddy Bundy, but that name was just the beginning. Everything changed when he got into a nasty feud with Texas wrestling's royal family, the Von Erichs. That's when he joined forces with the smooth-talking manager Gary Hart, who saw something special in the big man. Hart knew exactly what to do. He rebranded his massive wrestler as King Kong Bundy. Just like the famous movie monster, Bundy was huge, intimidating, and impossible to ignore. But sometimes the best things in wrestling happen by accident. During his heated battles with the Von Erichs, Bundy lost his hair in a match. Instead of being a setback, this became his trademark look. That massive, bald head made him stand out from every other wrestler. You couldn't miss King Kong Bundy when he walked into an arena. After making his mark in Texas, Bundy hit the road to become an even better wrestler. He traveled across the country, wrestling in different territories and learning new tricks along the way. In the American Wrestling Association, he terrorized their biggest stars. But his biggest achievement during this time came in Georgia Championship Wrestling. There, he teamed up with a mysterious masked wrestler known as the Superstar, and together they did something incredible. They beat the unstoppable Road Warriors for the NWA National Tag Team Championship. The Road Warriors were considered nearly unbeatable, so this was a huge deal. But it was in Mid-South Wrestling where Bundy came up with something that would make him truly unique. He wasn't satisfied with the regular 3-count pin that every other wrestler used. No, King Kong Bundy demanded the referee count to 5. This wasn't just showing off, it was brilliant psychology. Every time he pinned someone for a 5 count, it sent a clear message to everyone watching. I'm not just beating these guys, I'm destroying them. This 5 count became his calling card, something fans would anticipate every time he stepped into the ring. When King Kong Bundy stormed into the WWF on March 16, 1985, everyone knew something huge was about to happen. The WWF had been running promos for weeks, telling fans that a monster was coming. When Bundy finally stepped through the curtain on Championship Wrestling, jaws dropped. Poor Mario Mancini was in the ring, probably wishing he had called in sick that day. What happened next wasn't just a match. It was a demolition that had fans on the edge of their seats. The loud-mouthed manager Jimmy Hart was grinning from ear to ear, knowing he had just unleashed wrestling's newest nightmare on the WWF. But it was at the very first WrestleMania, in the world's most famous arena, Madison Square Garden, where Bundy really made history. His opponent that night was Special Delivery Jones, a tough veteran who'd been in countless battles. But nobody was ready for what happened next. The bell rang, and before the hot dogs in the concession stand could get cold, it was all over. 9 seconds. That's all it took. Bundy crushed SD Jones in the corner with his brutal avalanche splash, followed by his bone-crushing big splash in the middle of the ring. The referee couldn't count fast enough, even with Bundy demanding his trademark 5 count. Wrestling fans had seen quick matches before, but this was different. This was a statement that echoed through the wrestling world. King Kong Bundy wasn't just big, he was unstoppable. All through the summer of 1985, Bundy left a trail of broken opponents across the country. But everything changed in September when Jimmy Hart made a deal that would shake up the wrestling world. He traded Bundy to the greatest manager in wrestling, Bobby the Brain Heenan. The Brain knew exactly what to do with his new monster. He aimed Bundy right at the biggest target possible, the legendary Andre the Giant. Now, challenging Andre wasn't something wrestlers did lightly. The 7'4" Giant had been undefeated for 15 years. But Bundy didn't just challenge Andre. He ambushed him during a match and did the unthinkable. He trapped Andre in the corner and delivered splash after devastating splash until Andre's sternum actually cracked under the impact. The message was crystal clear. King Kong Bundy wasn't afraid of giants. He broke them. This wasn't just another wrestling angle. This was the moment Bundy proved he could destroy anyone, no matter how big or legendary they were. The attack on Andre the Giant wasn't just a one-time thing. It kicked off some of the most exciting matches of 1985. Wrestling fans couldn't wait to see these giants clash. It all started heating up on Saturday night's main event, which was a huge deal because wrestling was rarely on network TV back then. On October 3, 1985, everyone tuned in to see an explosive tag team match. In one corner, you had King Kong Bundy teaming up with another giant, Big John Studd. In the other corner stood Andre the Giant, still nursing his injured sternum, alongside the powerhouse Tony Atlas. The building was electric that night. You could feel the tension in the air. But that was just the warm-up. The WWF raised the stakes even higher in the second match when Andre brought in the biggest star in wrestling, the WWF champion himself, Hulk Hogan. Just imagine this scene. Andre the Giant and Hulk Hogan, probably the two most famous wrestlers in the world, standing together in one corner while Bundy and Studd, two massive monsters, waited in the other. These matches showed everyone a different side of Bundy. Sure, he was devastating in single matches, but now he was proving he could be just as dominant in tag team action. He wasn't just a solo destroyer. He was a smart wrestler who could work with a partner to take down even the biggest stars in the business. Everything came to a head on September 23, 1985, at the world's most famous arena, Madison Square Garden. They called it the Colossal Jostle, and that name wasn't just hype. Picture this: Andre the Giant, all 7'4", and nearly 500 pounds of him, finally getting his hands on Bundy one-on-one. The garden was packed to the rafters. Even though Bundy didn't win the match, something more important happened that night. He proved he belonged in the ring with the legendary Andre the Giant. Remember, very few wrestlers could even stand up to Andre, let alone give him a real fight. But Bundy didn't just stand up to him. He made Andre work harder than he had in years. After that night, nobody could say Bundy was just another big guy. He had earned his place among wrestling's elite monsters. After proving he could hang with Andre the Giant, King Kong Bundy had his eyes on an even bigger prize, the WWF Championship around Hulk Hogan's waist. But Bundy didn't just politely challenge Hogan to a match. No, he made a statement that shocked the wrestling world on Saturday night's main event. Together with his massive partner, the Magnificent Morocco, Bundy launched a surprise attack on Hogan that left fans gasping. This wasn't your typical wrestling beatdown. They hit Hogan so hard they actually cracked his ribs. Every time Hogan took a breath in the following weeks, you could see the pain on his face. This wasn't just wrestling storyline stuff. Those bruises were real, and everyone knew it. This brutal attack set the stage for something huge, the main event of WrestleMania 2 on April 7, 1986. But Hogan and Bundy weren't just going to have a regular match. No, they were going to be locked inside a steel cage. The build-up to this match was intense. Every time Bundy appeared on TV, he'd remind everyone how he'd injured Hogan's ribs, promising to finish the job inside the cage. Meanwhile, Hogan was selling those injured ribs, making fans wonder if their hero could possibly survive being trapped in a cage with this monster. When WrestleMania 2 finally arrived, the atmosphere was electric. Just imagine this scene. The massive steel cage lowering around the ring, Bundy's intimidating figure filling one corner, and Hogan, still favoring those injured ribs, pacing in the other. What followed was something wrestling fans still talk about today. Bundy used every inch of that cage, throwing Hogan into the steel, squashing him in corners, and coming incredibly close to winning the title several times. The fans were on their feet, holding their breath with every near fall. Could this be the night Hulkamania died? But just when it looked like Bundy might actually pull it off, Hogan found that supernatural strength he was famous for. Fighting through the pain of his injured ribs, he managed to hit his legendary leg drop, the move that had finished off countless opponents before. Even though Bundy didn't win the title that night, he did something just as important. He helped make WrestleMania feel like the biggest event in wrestling. This wasn't just another match. It was a war between giants that proved WrestleMania was truly wrestling's Super Bowl. After the huge cage match with Hogan, Bundy wasn't done making waves. He teamed back up with his old partner Big John Studd, and together they stumbled into one of the strangest and most fascinating feuds in wrestling history, the mystery of the Machines. Here's where things get really interesting. A group of massive wrestlers started showing up in masks, calling themselves the Machines. The leader was Giant Machine, and something about him seemed really familiar. Bobby the Brain. Heenan started putting the pieces together. He was convinced that Giant Machine was actually Andre the Giant in disguise. See, Andre had been suspended at the time, and Heenan believed this was his clever way of sneaking back into the WWF. Bundy and Studd became like wrestling detectives, trying to prove it was Andre under that mask. Every week, they'd try new ways to expose Giant Machine, measuring his footprints, comparing his moves to Andre's, even trying to rip the mask off during matches. This wasn't just about wrestling anymore. It was like a mystery show mixed with athletics. Fans packed arenas to see these wild six-man tag matches where Bundy, Studd, and Heenan would face different combinations of the Machines and their partners. The matches were full of drama and comedy, with Heenan constantly pointing out evidence that Giant Machine was Andre, while Bundy and Studd tried to unmask their mysterious opponents. But that's not all Bundy was up to during this time. He and Studd set their sights on the WWF Tag Team Champions, the British Bulldogs, Davey Boy Smith, and the Dynamite Kid. Now, this was really interesting because it showed a whole different side of Bundy. The Bulldogs were way smaller but incredibly quick and hard-hitting. Everyone wondered how a monster like Bundy would handle these speedy opponents. But he proved he could do more than just squash people. He adapted his style, showing he could keep up with the Bulldogs' faster pace. Sure, they never won the tag team titles, but these matches proved Bundy wasn't just a one-trick giant. He could work with anybody, big or small, and make the matches exciting. WrestleMania 3 showed fans a side of King Kong Bundy they never expected to see. Instead of battling giants, he found himself in one of the most unusual matches ever, a mixed six-person tag team match involving Little People wrestlers. Bundy teamed up with Little Tokyo and Lord Littlebrook against an odd team of Hillbilly Jim and his partners, the Hang Away. Finally, Bundy had enough. In a moment that made the massive crowd gasp, he grabbed Little Beaver, hoisted him up, and slammed him to the mat. Then came the crushing elbow drop, a move that looked absolutely devastating given the size difference. The referee and partners turned on him. This wasn't just another match. It showed that Bundy could tell a story in the ring and get fans emotionally invested. But 1987 wasn't done with King Kong Bundy yet. He entered the prestigious King of the Ring tournament, proving he had the stamina to wrestle multiple tough matches in a single night. This was a big deal, because most giants couldn't last through several matches like that. Bundy powered his way to the finals, where he faced the flashy and technical Macho Man, Randy Savage. Though Savage eventually won, Bundy showed everyone he could hang with the most skilled wrestlers in the business. Then came one of the biggest moments of late 1987. Bundy actually beat Hulk Hogan. Sure, it was by countout on Saturday night's Main Event 13, but beating Hogan in any way was a huge deal back then. Remember, this is when Hulkamania was at its peak. Even though Hogan got his revenge in the rematch on the next show, that victory proved Bundy was still one of the most dangerous men in wrestling. Anytime he stepped in the ring, fans knew there was a real chance they might see Hulkamania come crashing down. After dominating the WWF for years, Bundy surprised everyone by leaving in early 1988. He mostly stayed away from the big spotlight, showing up here and there in smaller wrestling shows. But you can't keep a monster down forever. In late 1994, wrestling fans' jaws dropped when King Kong Bundy made his return to the WWF. This time, he was part of Ted DiBiase's $1 Million Corporation, a group of wrestlers backed by the $1 Million Man's money. It was like seeing a legend come back to life. His comeback match couldn't have gone better. At the 1994 Survivor Series, Bundy teamed up with another monster, Bam Bigelow. Together, they did something incredible. They were the only survivors in their elimination match against Lex Luger's team of American heroes. For a moment, it felt like the unstoppable Bundy of old was back. But wrestling had changed while Bundy was away. The 1995 Royal Rumble showed just how much. Everyone expected the returning giant to dominate the match. After all, how do you throw someone that big over the top rope? But then something shocking happened. Mabel, another massive wrestler who was on the rise, eliminated Bundy after just 3 minutes. The crowd couldn't believe it. This wasn't how the story was supposed to go for a legend like Bundy. His final WrestleMania moment came at WrestleMania 11, where he faced one of the most intimidating wrestlers ever, The Undertaker. Now, this wasn't quite the same as his legendary cage match with Hogan or his quick victory over S.D. Jones. But even though Bundy was older now, you could still see flashes of what made him so scary in the first place. When he trapped The Undertaker in the corner for his famous avalanche splash, longtime fans got goosebumps, remembering the monster who had terrorized the WWF in the 1980s. While he didn't win the match, he showed that even in the twilight of his career, King Kong Bundy could still make fans hold their breath whenever he stepped in the ring. After hanging up his wrestling boots, Chris Pallies had to deal with something much tougher than any opponent he'd faced in the ring: the long-term effects of his wrestling career. Like many wrestlers who gave their bodies to entertain fans night after night, Pallies was worried about brain injuries that could affect the rest of his life. He wasn't alone in this fight. Along with other wrestlers, he joined a big lawsuit against WWE, claiming the company hadn't done enough to protect wrestlers from serious head injuries. The lawsuit brought up some heavy issues. Things got complicated when the lawsuit was thrown out by the courts in September 2018. But the effects of this legal battle went beyond the courtroom. Wrestling journalist Anthony Mango from Bleacher Report pointed out something interesting. He believed this lawsuit might be why Pallies never made it into the WWE Hall of Fame. Despite being one of the most memorable big men in wrestling history and helping make WrestleMania the huge event it is today, King Kong Bundy's name was never called for the Hall of Fame. King Kong Bundy wasn't just a monster in the ring. He had a whole other life in the entertainment world. Here's something cool that not everyone knows. The main family in the hit TV show Married with Children wasn't named Bundy by accident. The show's creators were such big wrestling fans that they named the family after King Kong Bundy himself. He even showed up on the show several times, and fans went crazy every time he appeared. But that wasn't his only brush with Hollywood. In the movie Moving, he got to work with comedy legend Richard Pryor. Picture this: the massive King Kong Bundy playing a clumsy mover. It was like seeing your favorite wrestling monster in a whole new light. Then there was Weird Science, where he got to play a wrestling coach. Talk about perfect casting. Who better to teach TV characters about wrestling than a real-life wrestling legend? Later in life, Bundy surprised everyone by stepping onto comedy club stages. That's right. The same guy who demanded 5 counts and crushed opponents in steel cages was now making people laugh on purpose. He traded body slams for punchlines, proving he had a quick wit to match his impressive size. But on March 4, 2019, the wrestling world lost a true giant. Chris Pallies, known to millions as King Kong Bundy, passed away at his home in Glassboro, New Jersey. He was just 63 years old, taken too soon by complications from diabetes. The same town where his incredible journey began now said goodbye to one of wrestling's most unforgettable characters. When we look back at King Kong Bundy's amazing career, we see so much more than just another big guy in wrestling. Before him, most giant wrestlers would just lumber around the ring, using their size and nothing else. Bundy changed all that. Here was a huge man who could move like someone half his size, who could tell stories in the ring, who could make you laugh on TV one day and terrify you in a steel cage the next. Bundy's biggest gift to wrestling was showing future big men what was possible. He showed up in main events at the first 2 WrestleManias, helping make those shows the huge deal they are today. He broke Andre the Giant's sternum, went toe-to-toe with Hulk Hogan in a steel cage, and even made people take little people matches seriously at WrestleMania 3. He could work with anybody, any style, any size, and make it look good. After him, you had to have personality. You had to be able to work with different kinds of opponents. Whenever you see a modern giant wrestler moving quickly or cutting a funny promo, you're seeing a little bit of Bundy's influence. Today's wrestling fans might see clips of King Kong Bundy and think of him as a star from wrestling's past. But for those who saw him in his prime, who felt the arena shake when he hit that corner splash, who counted along as referees got to 5, we know we were watching something special. The walking condominium may be gone, but the blueprint he created for future wrestling giants will stand forever. Next up, Bam Bigelow. Bam Bigelow was the massive monster who shocked the world by pulling off moves that only cruiserweights were supposed to do. He went from wrestling NFL legend Lawrence Taylor to becoming a real-life hero who suffered severe burns while rescuing 3 children from a fire. But 17 years after his death, Bigelow still isn't in the Hall of Fame. On September 1, 1961, Scott Bigelow was born in the coastal town of Asbury Park, New Jersey. Even as a child, everyone could see there was something different about Scott. He was much bigger than other kids his age, and he had natural athletic talents that made him stand out wherever he went. In high school, Bigelow's athletic talents really began to shine. Although he wouldn't end up finishing school, he achieved something remarkable, earning varsity letters in both football and wrestling during just his sophomore year. His wrestling skills were particularly outstanding, and in 1979, he fought his way to 3rd place in the New Jersey State Wrestling Tournament. But his promising athletic career hit a roadblock when doctors discovered a cyst in his lower back. This painful condition forced him to sit out his entire senior wrestling season. As Bigelow entered his late teenage years, he started exploring different ways to show off his natural strength. He became a regular face at arm wrestling tournaments, where his powerful build made him a formidable opponent. However, this period of his life also took some dark turns. His teenage years were marked by numerous run-ins with the law, ranging from relatively minor incidents to serious offenses. The list of charges was lengthy: aggravated assault, attempted kidnapping, drug possession, robbery, and sexual assault. These troubles with the law eventually led to serious consequences. As a teenager, Bigelow spent 9 months locked up at the Albert C. Wagner Youth Correctional Facility, a time that would leave a lasting impact on his life path. After leaving high school without graduating, Bigelow tried his hand at several tough jobs that suited his intimidating size. He worked as a bouncer, a bodyguard, and even a bounty hunter. During his bounty hunting days, he told a wild story about chasing a fugitive in Mexico that went terribly wrong. According to Bigelow, the person he was hunting shot him in the back, and Mexican authorities threw him in jail for 6 months in Mexico City. When he got back to the United States, Bigelow took a hard look at his future. With no high school diploma and a rough past, he made a choice that would change his life forever. As he put it plainly, "There wasn't much else I was qualified for, so he decided to become a professional wrestler." It turned out to be the perfect fit for someone with his unique combination of size and athletic ability. In May 1985, Bigelow took his first steps toward his wrestling career by joining Larry Sharp's Monster Factory Wrestling School in Clementon, New Jersey. This famous training ground was known for turning out some of wrestling's biggest stars. Just a few months later, on August 23, 1985, Bigelow had his very first professional match. It happened at the famous Studio 54 nightclub in New York City, at a show run by well-known wrestling promoter Paul Heyman. By the middle of 1986, Bigelow had moved south to Memphis, Tennessee, where he started wrestling for the Continental Wrestling Association. This is where he got his famous nickname, becoming known as Bam Bigelow. The wrestling promoters knew exactly what to do with someone as big and athletic as Bigelow. They turned him into a monster. He would often fight multiple opponents at once in handicap matches, showing off his incredible strength and power. He became known for breaking the rules, especially by climbing to the top rope and jumping off, something that was illegal in wrestling at that time. These dramatic matches helped build his reputation as one of wrestling's most intimidating new stars. Growing quickly in the wrestling world, Bigelow hit a major milestone on July 28, 1986. In a match called a Battle Royal, where many wrestlers fight at the same time until only one is left standing, Bigelow emerged victorious and won his first big title, the Southern Heavyweight Championship. But his time at the top didn't last long. Just a few weeks later, on September 8th, he lost the belt to Jerry Lawler in a brutal type of match called a Texas Death Match, where wrestlers fight until one can't continue. After losing his title, Bigelow disappeared from the Continental Wrestling Association for a while to heal up. But when he came back, something unexpected happened. He joined forces with Jerry Lawler, the very man who had taken his championship. Together, they became a powerful tag team, picking fights with two other wrestlers named Austin Idol and Tommy Rich. The fans loved these intense matches, which often turned into wild brawls. Near the end of 1986, Bigelow tried something completely different. He moved to Texas to work for World Class Championship Wrestling, where he transformed into a totally new character. Playing on Cold War tensions of the time, he became Crusher Yurov, a scary Russian wrestler who struck fear into American audiences. This new role worked well for him. He won another title called the WCWA Television Championship. His success that year caught people's attention, and the readers of a respected wrestling magazine called the Wrestling Observer Newsletter voted him as the best new wrestler of 1986, giving him their Rookie of the Year award. This was quite an achievement, showing how quickly Bigelow had made his mark in professional wrestling. At the start of 1987, Bigelow's wrestling career took an international turn when he began traveling to Japan. Working for New Japan Pro Wrestling, he became known as Crusher Bam Bigelow. Japanese fans loved his unique mix of size and agility, something they hadn't seen much before in their wrestling rings. In May 1987, Bigelow made the big jump to America's largest wrestling company, the World Wrestling Federation. At first, he only wrestled in matches that weren't shown on TV, called dark matches and house shows. These matches helped him learn the WWF style and get comfortable performing for bigger crowds. When he finally appeared on television, the company created an interesting story around him called The Battle for Bam Bam. 4 of wrestling's most famous heel managers, Jimmy Hart, Johnny Valiant, Mr. Fuji, and Bobby Heenan, all fought over who would get to be Bigelow's manager. Everyone wondered who Bigelow would choose. In September 1987, he surprised everyone by picking Oliver Humperdinck, which made him one of the good guys in wrestling. Bigelow quickly showed why everyone wanted him on their side. In September and October 1987, he won several Battle Royal matches, throwing out multiple wrestlers to claim victory. Then came his first big TV special appearance at a show called Survivor Series. He joined a team of wrestling stars: Don Muraco, the famous Hulk Hogan, Ken Patera, and Paul Orndorff. They faced off against some of wrestling's scariest heels: the massive Andre the Giant, King Kong Bundy, Butch Reed, One Man Gang, and Rick Rude. Though Bigelow's team lost, he showed he could hang with wrestling's biggest names. By January 1988, Bigelow was regularly wrestling in main event matches. He started a heated rivalry with Ted DiBiase, known as the $1 Million Man. Often, Bigelow would team up with the biggest star in wrestling, Hulk Hogan, to face DiBiase and Andre in exciting matches that had fans packing arenas across the country. In June 1988, Bigelow faced one of the toughest matches of his career against Andre the Giant at Madison Square Garden. The match turned ugly when Andre decided to fight for real instead of following the usual wrestling style. Wrestling star Bret Hart later said Andre had nearly destroyed Bigelow in the ring. After this brutal match, Bigelow didn't stick around. He went straight to the locker room, grabbed his stuff, and left the building without talking to anyone. By July 1988, Bigelow was done with the World Wrestling Federation. His knees were badly hurt from all the wrestling, but that wasn't the only reason he left. Many other wrestlers had grown jealous of how quickly he'd risen to fame. They didn't like that a newcomer was getting so many big matches and opportunities while they'd been waiting for years. In September 1988, Bigelow showed up in a different wrestling company, Jim Crockett Promotions, which was about to change its name to World Championship Wrestling. His manager, Oliver Humperdinck, came with him to the new company. Bigelow quickly jumped into action by starting a fight with one of wrestling's most famous groups, the Four Horsemen. This led to a huge opportunity in November 1988, when he got to wrestle the group's leader, Ric Flair, for the NWA World Heavyweight Championship. The match happened at the Charlotte Coliseum, though it wasn't shown on TV. Even though Bigelow fought hard, he couldn't beat Flair for the title. In 1990, Bigelow's wrestling career took a different turn. Instead of appearing on major TV shows, he mostly wrestled at smaller local events called house shows. When he did show up on TV, it was usually on less important shows like NWA Power Hour and NWA Main Event. Things got more interesting when Bigelow joined forces with a scary group of wrestlers called the Sullivan Slaughterhouse. The group was led by Kevin Sullivan and included the Wild Cactus Jack. These three made a fearsome team, known for their rough and violent style of wrestling. Their biggest moment as a team came in May 1990 at a big event called Capital Combat. Bigelow, Sullivan, and Cactus Jack teamed up for an important match against two very different opponents, Norman the Lunatic and the powerful Road Warriors. Despite the Sullivan Slaughterhouse's reputation for violence, they couldn't overcome their opponents that night. Norman the Lunatic and the Road Warriors won the match, dealing a big blow to Bigelow and his partners. In 1992, Bigelow's career path led him to Mexico, where he joined a company called the Universal Wrestling Association. His time there was mostly spent in six-man tag team matches, a very popular style of wrestling in Mexico. What made this period interesting was that he often teamed up with Andre the Giant. This was surprising because just 4 years earlier, Andre had beaten him up for real in that rough match at Madison Square Garden. But now they had put their bad blood behind them and worked together as partners. Later that year, in October 1992, Bigelow made his way back to the World Wrestling Federation. The company welcomed him back by letting him win many matches. These wins helped rebuild him as a powerful force in wrestling. The biggest moment of his comeback came in January 1993 at the Royal Rumble. There, he faced off against the Big Boss Man, a former prison guard turned wrestler known for his strength and toughness. Bigelow proved he was back in top form by defeating Big Boss Man in a convincing way. This victory showed everyone that Bam Bigelow was ready to be a major player in the WWF once again. On June 13th at the King of the Ring event, Bigelow showed his fighting spirit. He started strong by beating the tough Jim Duggan in the first round of the tournament. Lucky for him, he got to skip the next round because of a bye. But when he reached the final match, he had to face one of wrestling's greatest technicians, Bret Hart. Even though this was Bigelow's third time in a main event on a big show, he couldn't overcome Hart's skilled wrestling style and lost the match. Over the next year, Bigelow found himself mixed up in many different wrestling stories. One of the biggest moments came when he helped the massive champion Yokozuna keep his World Heavyweight Championship. During Yokozuna's match against the mysterious Undertaker, Bigelow was part of a group of heel wrestlers who jumped in and attacked the Undertaker. Thanks to this interference, Yokozuna managed to stay champion. This showed that Bigelow had fully embraced his role as one of the WWF top monsters. The storyline with Yokozuna proved that WWF trusted Bigelow to play important parts in their biggest stories. Even though he wasn't the champion himself, being involved in championship matches showed how valuable he had become to the company. Working with major stars like Yokozuna and The Undertaker put Bigelow right in the middle of the company's most important feuds. In a surprising moment on Monday Night Raw, on June 27, 1994, Bigelow ended his partnership with Luna Vachon. The wrestling world didn't have to wait long to find out what would happen next. Ted DiBiase, the $1 Million Man, announced he had bought Bigelow's contract. This meant Bigelow was now part of DiBiase's new group, the $1 Million Corporation. The $1 Million Corporation was a collection of wrestlers under DiBiase's control. This new role changed things for Bigelow, turning him into one of the group's most powerful members. Instead of working alone, he now had powerful friends to help him in his matches. This move turned out to be good for Bigelow. At the big Survivor Series event that year, he led his $1 Million team to victory against a team called Guts and Glory. This win proved that joining DiBiase's group had put Bigelow back on the path to success. Having the rich and influential DiBiase in his corner opened up new opportunities for Bigelow to shine in important matches. The WWF had big plans to make their biggest show of the year, WrestleMania 11, even more special. They reached out to Lawrence Taylor, a famous football player who had been an all-pro linebacker for the New York Giants. When Taylor said yes to wrestling a match, they picked Bigelow to be his opponent. This was huge. Bigelow would get to fight a real sports superstar. The story started at the Royal Rumble event where Taylor was watching the matches from a seat near the ring. That night, Bigelow lost a match to a much smaller wrestler called the 1-2-3 Kid. When Bigelow saw Taylor laughing at his loss, he got very angry. His pride hurt. Bigelow stomped over to where Taylor was sitting. Taylor tried to be nice and offered to shake hands, but Bigelow wasn't having any of it. Instead, he shoved the football star to the ground right in front of everyone. This shocking moment got everyone talking. A professional wrestler had just put his hands on one of football's biggest stars. The WWF knew this would grab headlines and get more people interested in seeing what would happen next. By having Bigelow attack Taylor, they had created the perfect reason for these two powerful athletes to face each other at WrestleMania. After shoving Taylor, Bigelow faced quick punishment on the next Monday Night Raw when he got suspended. But even when Vince McMahon tried to get him to say sorry in an interview, Bigelow stood his ground. Instead of apologizing, he challenged Taylor to fight him anytime and anywhere. This showed everyone how serious Bigelow was about proving himself against the football star. Taylor didn't want to fight at first, staying away from wrestling and focusing on his football career. But Bigelow wouldn't leave him alone, throwing insults at him every chance he got. Finally, on February 27, 1995, at a big press conference for WrestleMania 11, Taylor had enough. After listening to more of Bigelow's trash talk, he accepted the challenge to fight. The big match happened on April 2, 1995, in the main event of WrestleMania 11. Even though Bigelow lost to Taylor, the match was a huge success. Major sports media like Sports Illustrated, ESPN SportsCenter, and USA Today all covered the story. This was exactly what WWF wanted. Their wrestling show was getting attention from mainstream sports fans. What made the match really special was how well Bigelow performed. Wrestling insiders praised him for helping Taylor, who had never wrestled before, look good in the ring. Bigelow knew exactly how to work with Taylor's football skills and hide his lack of wrestling experience. This showed that Bigelow wasn't just a great wrestler. He was also smart enough to make an inexperienced opponent look like a real challenger. In late 1995, Bigelow started feeling unhappy with how things were going in the WWF. He didn't like the way Vince McMahon was running things or where the company was heading. His last match happened on November 19, 1995, at the Survivor Series event. That night, he lost to a mysterious new wrestler called Goldust, who had just started appearing in WWF shows. After leaving WWF, Bigelow spent the next decade moving between different wrestling companies. He showed up in World Championship Wrestling and the more hardcore-style ECW. Even though he kept wrestling, his star power wasn't what it used to be. The days of main-eventing WrestleMania and fighting football stars were behind him. Year after year, Bigelow's career slowly went downhill. Despite being one of wrestling's most talented big men who could move like someone half his size, he never again reached the heights he had achieved in WWF. The man who once headlined major shows and grabbed mainstream sports headlines found himself wrestling in smaller venues for less money, showing how quickly fortunes can change in professional wrestling. During this time, a hidden battle was taking over Bigelow's life. He was fighting a serious addiction to OxyContin, a powerful prescription painkiller. Like many wrestlers who dealt with years of injuries, he had started taking pain medication to keep performing. But the medicine that was supposed to help him ended up becoming a major problem. His health got so bad that he couldn't work anymore and had to rely on Social Security disability benefits to survive. His body was breaking down with atherosclerosis, a condition where his arteries got harder and narrower. He also developed diabetes and fought ongoing infections that his body struggled to beat. His back, which had taken countless bumps in the wrestling ring over the years, was in terrible shape. He needed several surgeries to try to fix it, but these operations took their toll. The once towering Bigelow even lost 2 inches of height because of all his back problems. The combination of his addiction and health issues showed how the physical demands of professional wrestling could destroy someone's body and life long after they left the ring. The sad end came on January 19, 2007. Bigelow's girlfriend found him dead in their home in Hudson, Florida. He was only 45 years old. When doctors looked into why he died, they found a deadly mix of drugs in his system: cocaine and benzodiazepines at fatal levels. His heart problems from atherosclerosis also played a part. The medical examiner in Pasco Pinellas County ruled that his death was an accident, not suicide. This tragic ending was perhaps the final chapter in a life marked by both tremendous success and serious struggles. Despite his great talent in the ring, Bigelow's troubled past created problems that followed him throughout his life. His criminal record was serious. The charges included attempted kidnapping, sexual assault, and a particularly concerning incident of reckless driving that put a child in danger. These weren't minor offenses, and they likely made WWE hesitant about celebrating him publicly. Beyond his legal troubles, Bigelow wasn't afraid to speak his mind about wrestling's dark side. He openly talked about 2 subjects wrestling companies usually want to keep quiet: backstage politics and the industry's drug problems. He shared stories about how wrestlers would fight for positions, how some got pushed ahead of others because of politics, and the widespread use of drugs among wrestlers to deal with pain and maintain their schedules. By speaking openly about these sensitive topics, Bigelow might have made himself an uncomfortable choice for the Hall of Fame. Next up, Jim Neidhart.
Jim Neidhart was one of wrestling's most intense characters, whose menacing laugh and powerhouse style made him the perfect tag team partner for Bret the Hitman Hart. He went from being a record-breaking shot-put athlete to becoming one of WWE's most memorable big men, throwing opponents around like ragdolls while rocking his iconic pink and black attire. However, in 2018, the Anvil would fall and never rise again. James Henry Neidhart was born on February 8, 1955 in Montebello, California. The first signs of his special talent showed up on his high school track field. Picture a young Jim walking up to throw the shot put with everyone watching quietly. What he did that day was amazing. He threw the shot put so far that he broke the California state record. His throw was so good that no one could beat it for 12 whole years at Newport Harbor High School. This wasn't just luck. Jim had the kind of raw strength that would make him famous later in life. But Jim's athletic ambitions initially led him down a different path. With his impressive strength and natural athleticism, the NFL came calling. In 1978, he found himself wearing the silver and black of the Oakland Raiders, a team known for taking chances on unique talents. When that door closed, another opened with the Dallas Cowboys. The football dream seemed within reach, but fate had other plans. Sometimes the most important moments in life come disguised as disappointments. While Jim's NFL career didn't materialize as he hoped, his remarkable physical prowess caught the eye of someone who would change his life forever. Wrestling promoter Stu Hart, a legendary figure in professional wrestling, saw something special in this powerful young athlete. Hart had an uncanny ability to spot diamond in the rough talent, and in Jim, he saw unlimited potential waiting to be unleashed in the wrestling ring. Those early years of shot-put competitions and football training weren't wasted time. His explosive strength, developed through years of athletic training, would soon find a new home in the world of professional wrestling, where raw power met showmanship in perfect harmony. Inside a Calgary basement, a place that would change wrestling forever, future stars learned their craft through pain and sweat. They called it the Hart Dungeon, and it wasn't your average wrestling school. When Stu Hart invited Jim to train there, no one knew this basement would completely change his life's path. The dungeon was brutal, and everyone knew it. Under the Hart family's house, wrestlers learned the hard way. Through real holds and genuine fighting moves, people in the neighborhood could hear yelling from that basement, and soon Jim's voice joined the mix. But while others just tried to survive the training, Jim actually got better and stronger. Yet Jim found more than just wrestling skills in Calgary. Between the tough training sessions with Stu Hart, he caught the eye of Stu's daughter Ellie. They clicked right away. Ellie knew wrestling inside and out. She'd watched her dad train wrestlers her whole life. They fell in love while Jim learned wrestling moves, their story playing out in the most unlikely of places. Their wedding in 1979 wasn't just about love. It joined Jim to wrestling's royal family. The strong guy from California was now part of the Hart clan, a family that had shaped wrestling for years and would keep doing so for many more. But getting married to Ellie would lead to something even bigger in Jim's wrestling career. Joining the Hart family opened doors Jim never expected. As he got better at wrestling and grew closer to the Harts, something big was brewing. A partnership that would shake up wrestling was just around the corner. Jim didn't know it yet, but his biggest moment in wrestling was coming, and it would change everything. At the legendary Calgary Stampede, Stu Hart saw a chance to turn his son-in-law into something special. The yearly festival wasn't just about cowboys and rides, it featured unique contests that celebrated raw strength. Among them was the Anvil toss, a challenge that would change Jim's wrestling identity forever. Stu pulled Jim aside with an offer that showed just how clever he was at building stars. $500 waited for Jim if he could not only compete in, but win the Anvil toss. In the 1970s, that kind of money turned heads. But more importantly, Stu knew a victory here would give Jim something priceless, a character that fans would never forget. The day of the competition arrived with the summer sun beating down on the Stampede grounds. As Jim stepped up to throw, the crowd grew quiet. The Anvil, weighing more than most men could lift, sat waiting. In a display of pure power that left spectators slack-jawed, Jim launched the massive piece of metal an incredible 11 feet, 2 inches through the air. The victory did more than just pad Jim's wallet. It gave birth to a wrestling identity that would stick with him for life. The Animal, his previous nickname, didn't quite capture what fans had just witnessed, but the Anvil, that told the whole story. It painted a picture of raw strength, blue-collar toughness, and the kind of power that could make even a seasoned strongman step back in awe. Stu's gamble paid off brilliantly. In one afternoon, Jim wasn't just another wrestler anymore, he was the Anvil, a name that would echo through wrestling arenas for years to come. The nickname fit him perfectly, capturing both his incredible strength and his connection to the hardy spirit of Calgary, a city built on grit and determination. In 1985, wrestling's landscape was changing fast, and one man stood at the center of it all: Vince McMahon. His World Wrestling Federation wasn't content staying regional anymore. Like a hungry shark, McMahon was swimming into new territories, gobbling up talent wherever he found it. And his eyes had locked onto two promising stars in Calgary. Jim and Bret Hart might have seemed like an odd match at first glance. One was a powerhouse who could toss anvils for fun, the other a technical master who could tie opponents in knots. But sometimes the best combinations are the ones that don't make sense on paper. McMahon saw something special in this unlikely duo, a perfect blend of power and precision that could revolutionize tag team wrestling. Enter Jimmy Hart, the megaphone-wielding manager known as the Mouth of the South. His addition to the mix was like throwing gasoline on an already hot fire. The decision to put him with Bret and Jim wasn't just smart, It was genius. Here was a mouthpiece who could rile up crowds while two of wrestling's finest talents did what they did best in the ring. The Hart Foundation wasn't just another tag team, they were a statement. In their pink and black gear, they stood out immediately. Jim's raw power complemented Bret's technical wizardry like peanut butter and jelly, creating a combination that would write their names in wrestling's history books. Looking back, it's clear that 1985 wasn't just another year in Jim's career. It was the moment everything changed. The Hart Foundation would go on to become one of wrestling's most decorated and remembered tag teams, proving that sometimes the best decisions in wrestling aren't just about individual talent, but about finding the perfect chemistry between partners. Inside the WWF's squared circle, something special was brewing. The Hart Foundation wasn't just another tag team, they were revolutionizing how tag team wrestling looked. When Bret Hart moved like a surgeon in the ring, carefully taking apart his opponents, Jim was there to shake the ropes and send them flying with explosive power. It was like watching a chess master team up with a wrecking ball. Their matches against the British Bulldogs wrote a new chapter in wrestling history. Davey Boy Smith and the Dynamite Kid weren't just opponents, they were the perfect rivals. All four men knew each other from the Hart Dungeon days, and it showed in the ring. These weren't just matches, they were violent ballet performances that left crowds breathless. Every lockup told a story, every counter move had meaning, and when these teams clashed, magic happened. February 7th, 1987, that's when everything changed. On an episode of Superstars of Wrestling, the Hart Foundation finally struck gold. The night they took the tag team titles from the British Bulldogs wasn't just a victory, it was a coronation. The pink and black attack had arrived at the top of the mountain, and they weren't planning to leave anytime soon. For nearly a year, they dominated the tag team scene. The Killer Bees brought their quick strikes and double-team moves, but the Foundation had an answer. The young stallions charged in with youthful energy, only to be taught harsh lessons by the champions. Strikeforce thought they had the formula figured out, but Bret and Jim proved them wrong time and again. Each successful defense added new wrinkles to their game. Bret would soften up opponents with his technical mastery, while Jim stalked the ring like a caged animal, waiting to unleash his power. Their opponents never knew which was worse, getting caught in Bret's sharpshooter or being on the receiving end of Jim's devastating power slam. This wasn't just a championship reign, it was a masterclass in tag team wrestling that teams would study for generations to come. When the summer heat of 1988 rolled in, wrestling fans witnessed a clash of titans that shook the ring posts. Demolition wasn't just any tag team, they were walking wrecking machines in face paint and spikes. When they locked up with the Hart Foundation at SummerSlam, the ring could barely contain the explosion of power. Jim, refusing to back down, went chest to chest with axe and smash, proving he could throw down with wrestling's most feared powerhouses. But it was their battles with the Rockers that showed wrestling fans something they didn't expect. Shawn Michaels and Marty Jannetty moved like lightning and flew through the air like they had wings. Most big men would have been left in the dust, but Jim showed he had more tricks up his sleeve than anyone knew. The Anvil, all 280 pounds of him, adapted his style on the fly. He'd catch the Rockers mid-flight, turn their own momentum against them, yet still keep up with their fast-paced attack. These matches across 89 and 90 weren't just great wrestling, they were proof that Jim was something special. While other power wrestlers stuck to their usual playbook, Jim showed he could wrestle any style thrown at him. One night he'd be trading power moves with giants, the next he'd be catching high flyers and matching speed with wrestling's quickest stars. In the ring with the Rockers, Jim revealed layers to his wrestling that nobody saw coming. He didn't just rely on raw strength anymore, he showed timing, agility, and ring smarts that surprised everyone. When Michaels or Jannetty came flying off the top rope, the Anvil was ready with perfect positioning and split-second timing. These weren't just matches, they were showcases of how a true ring veteran could evolve and adapt. Through these feuds, the Anvil proved what old-school wrestling fans had always known. Size and power were just part of his arsenal. Whether it was surviving Demolition's assault or keeping pace with the Rockers' high-speed attacks, Jim showed that a true wrestling great could do it all. His ability to adapt while staying true to his power-based core made these matches classics that fans still talk about today. The wrestling world sizzled as the Hart Foundation's war with Jimmy Hart's crew reached fever pitch. Their old manager had become their worst enemy, and every match felt personal. At the '89 Royal Rumble, they found an unlikely partner in Jim Duggan, the patriotic powerhouse whose voice echoed through arenas. Together, they faced off against the ruthless combo of Dino Bravo and the Rougeau brothers in a match that had fans on their feet. 2 out of 3 Falls matches were wrestling's ultimate test of endurance and skill. It wasn't enough to get one pin. you needed too. When the dust settled, the Hart Foundation and Duggan stood tall, proving that sometimes the good guys do win. The victory sent a message. The pink and black attack wasn't just surviving, they were thriving. WrestleMania 5 brought another challenge, the Honky Tonk Man and Greg Valentine. This wasn't just any match, this was wrestling's biggest stage. The Hart Foundation rose to the occasion, adding another win to their impressive record. But behind the scenes, changes were brewing. Both Bret and Jim were starting to eye something new, singles glory. House shows became testing grounds for both men's solo careers. While fans knew them as tag team specialists, these matches showed different sides of both wrestlers. Jim, in particular, caught everyone's attention. The Anvil wasn't content with just tag team success, he wanted more. His eyes locked onto Rick Rude's Intercontinental Championship, and suddenly, the powerhouse who'd made his name throwing anvils was hunting for singles gold. The matches against Rude showed a different side of Jim. The Ravishing One was known for his technical skill and ring psychology, forcing the Anvil to dig deep into his wrestling toolbox. These weren't just matches, they were proof that Jim could hang with the best singles competitors in the business. Every near fall and close call had fans believing the Anvil might just capture gold on his own. Los Angeles Sports Arena, WrestleMania 7, 1991. Wrestling's biggest night was about to turn ugly. A year earlier, the Hart Foundation had steamrolled the Bolsheviks in record time. But tonight they faced something different, the street-tough Nasty Boys, a team that didn't just bend the rules, they broke them with a smile. The match was like watching a car crash in slow motion. The Nasty Boys brought their garbage can style of wrestling, turning the ring into a war zone. Knobs and Sags weren't interested in technical wrestling. They wanted to hurt people. The Hart Foundation tried to keep it clean, showcasing their signature moves and teamwork, but sometimes nice guys finish last. When Jerry Sags pulled out that motorcycle helmet, everything changed. The referee was distracted, focusing on the wrong corner at exactly the wrong moment. The crack of metal on flesh echoed through the arena as the helmet connected with Jim's skull. The Anvil, for all his power and toughness, couldn't overcome physics and steel. He dropped like a stone. Brian Knobbs, grinning like a kid who'd just gotten away with stealing cookies, made the cover. The referee's hand hit the mat 3 times, and just like that, the Hart Foundation's reign was over. The Nasty Boys celebrated like they'd won clean, but everyone knew better. That motorcycle helmet had written a new chapter in tag team history, even if it wasn't the ending most fans wanted. This wasn't just any title change, it marked the end of an era. The Hart Foundation had carried the tag team division with class and skill. Now the belts sat around the waists of 2 brawlers who'd stolen them with a foreign object. Wrestling could be cruel that way, but sometimes the dirtiest players drew the biggest cards. The Los Angeles crowd sat in shocked silence, watching as the Nasty Boys paraded around with their ill-gotten gains, while Jim and Hart were left to pick up the pieces of their shattered championship dreams. The early 90s didn't just mark the end of the Hart Foundation's championship runs, they cemented their place as pioneers who changed tag team wrestling forever. Like master artists who left their mark on every canvas they touched, Bret and Jim had painted a new picture of what tag team wrestling could be. Watch any Hart Foundation match, and you'd see the blueprint they created. It wasn't just about Bret's technical wizardry or Jim's raw power anymore. It was the way they wove these elements together. When Jim would catch a flying opponent and turn them into a power slam, it wasn't just a move, it was poetry in pink and black. The way Bret would soften up an opponent's leg before the Anvil would come in to finish the job, that wasn't just strategy, it was storytelling that fans could feel in their bones. Those pink and black tights became more than just wrestling gear. In a world of neon colors and wild patterns, the Hart Foundation's look stood out by being sharp and professional. Every time they stepped through the curtain, they looked like they meant business. That image of professionalism and skill became their calling card, inspiring a whole generation of wrestlers to take their craft just as seriously. But perhaps their greatest gift to wrestling was their versatility. One night they could slug it out with powerhouses like Demolition. The next they could keep pace with high flyers like the Rockers. They proved that a great tag team didn't need to be one-dimensional. This adaptability set a new standard. To be the best, you had to be able to wrestle anyone, anywhere, any style. Years later, when fans would watch new tag teams rise through the ranks, they'd see pieces of the Hart Foundation's influence, way teams worked together, timing of their moves, psychology of their matches. All of it carried echoes of what Bret Hart and Jim had built together. They hadn't just been champions, they'd been teachers, showing everyone who followed them what tag team wrestling could be. Inside the WWF's ever-changing landscape, Jim found himself at a crossroads after 1991. The Hart Foundation might have been done, but the Anvil wasn't finished. When he joined forces with Owen Hart, Bret's high-flying younger brother, fans got excited. Here was a fresh take on a winning formula, the power of the Anvil matched with Owen's incredible aerial skills. The new foundation hit the ground running with a fresh look and attitude, gone were the pink and black tights, replaced with a more colorful style that matched the early 90s vibe. But keeping up with teams like the Natural Disasters wasn't easy. Earthquake and Typhoon brought the kind of raw power that even Jim had to respect, leading to battles that shook rings across the country. The Beverly Brothers provided a different kind of challenge. Bo and Blake Beverly were technically sound and loved to bend the rules when refs weren't looking. New Foundation's matches with them showed flashes of brilliance, moments where it seemed like Owen and Jim might capture the same magic that made the original Hart Foundation special. But wrestling's a funny business, and sometimes things just don't click the way you hope. Despite Owen's incredible talent and Jim's proven track record, the new foundation never quite caught fire like its predecessor. The chemistry was there, but the timing wasn't. When February 15th, 1992 rolled around, nobody knew they were watching the team's final match together. The new foundation's short run became one of wrestling's what-if stories. The pieces were all there. Owen's skill, Jim's power, their family connection, but sometimes even the most promising combinations need more than just talent to succeed. That final match marked not just the end of a team, but the close of another chapter in Jim's ever-evolving career in the squared circle. 1992 hit like a tornado backstage at WWF. When faced with a mandatory drug test, Jim made a choice that would change everything. The Anvil, known for his explosive power in the ring, let that same intensity spill over behind the scenes. The image of a television monitor flying through the air became his unexpected farewell to the company that had made him famous. But wrestlers don't stay down for long. Jim hit the independent scene like a man with something to prove. Small towns, high school gyms, anywhere there was a ring, and fans who wanted to see the Anvil in action. These weren't the big arenas he was used to, but they kept his skills sharp and his name alive in wrestling. 1993 brought new opportunities when WCW came calling. The company needed established stars, and Jim brought name value and real wrestling credentials. His matches with Sting showed he could hang with the best. The Stinger might have been WCW's franchise player. Jim gave him all he could handle, proving the Anvil wasn't just a tag team specialist. The feud with Rick Rude felt personal, like unfinished business from their WWF days. These weren't tag matches anymore. There was nowhere to hide and nobody to tag. Just two veterans trading moves and telling stories in the ring. Jim showed that his power game worked just as well in singles competition, even against one of wrestling's most technically gifted performers. This chapter in WCW painted a different picture of the Anvil. Without the Hart Foundation name or the pink and black gear, he stood on his own. Every power slam and every victory was his alone, proving that while tag team wrestling made him famous, it wasn't the only thing he could do. The man who once tossed anvils for money was now throwing his weight around in a new territory, writing his own story one match at a time. Back in the WWF, 1994 brought a twist nobody saw coming. The Anvil wasn't just back, he was back with a grudge. When he sided with Owen Hart against Bret, fans couldn't believe it. The man who'd been Bret's partner and brother-in-law was now standing against him, smirking alongside the younger Hart brother in one of wrestling's most personal feuds. King of the Ring became the stage for family drama turned violent. In one corner stood Bret and his loyal ally, the British Bulldog. In the other, Owen and Jim, former friends turned bitter enemies. The match wasn't just about winning, it was about family pride and betrayal. Every move carried extra weight, every taunt cut deeper, because these men knew each other so well. The Anvil showed a nastier side that night. Gone was the lovable powerhouse who dominated with Bret. In his place stood a meaner, more vicious version of Jim. He didn't just want to beat Bret, he wanted to hurt him. Each power move came with added spite, each taunt designed to get under the hitman's skin. Working as a heel against Bret brought out something new in Jim's performance. He knew all of Bret's moves, all his tendencies, and he used that knowledge against him. The same power game that had once backed up Bret's technical skills was now being used to tear him down. It wasn't just good wrestling, it was great storytelling. Wrestling runs on emotion, and this match had it in spades. The sight of Jim, once Bret's trusted partner, now trying to destroy him, added layers of drama that went beyond simple good guy versus bad guy. It proved the Anvil could play either side of the fence convincingly, making fans hate him just as easily as they'd once loved him. In 1997, wrestling caught fire in a way nobody expected. The Hart Foundation wasn't just back, they were different. Meaner, prouder. Standing tall with Canadian flags, they turned their backs on American fans while being heroes back home. Jim, once again alongside the Hart brothers, found himself in the middle of wrestling's hottest story. The crowd reactions were unlike anything before. In America, they were villains who dared to speak against the USA, but crossed the border into Canada, and they were national heroes. The Anvil and his partners didn't just get cheers in Canada, they got the kind of reception usually reserved for rock stars. Every appearance turned arenas into wild parties or riot scenes, depending on which side of the border they were on. July 6, 1997, Calgary. In your house, Canadian Stampede. The stars aligned for one perfect night. In the ring stood some of wrestling's biggest names. Stone Cold Steve Austin, already becoming a legend. Ken Shamrock, the world's most dangerous man. The Legion of Doom, powerhouses who dominated for years. Goldust, one of wrestling's most unique characters. Against them, the Hart Foundation in their hometown. The Calgary crowd that night wasn't just hot, they were nuclear. Every move by Jim and his partners brought the house down. When the Anvil unleashed his power moves, the building shook. This wasn't just another match. It was a celebration of everything the Hart Foundation stood for, everything they'd built over the years. Nobody knew it then, but this would be Jim's last dance on the big stage. If you're going to take your final bow on pay-per-view, doing it in Calgary, with family, in front of fans who treated you like royalty, that's the way to do it. The Hart Foundation's victory that night wasn't just a win. It was the perfect ending to a story that had started years ago in Stu Hart's basement, coming full circle in the city where it all began. The spotlight's glow can be hard to leave behind, but Jim, the years after his in-ring career, told a darker story than any wrestling match. When the roar of the crowd fades and the ring ropes stop bouncing, some wrestlers find the silence deafening. The Anvil was one of them. Wrestling isn't kind to bodies or minds. Years of taking bumps, throwing power slams, and living life on the road had left their mark. The physical toll was only part of the story. Like many athletes, Jim struggled to find his place in a world that no longer revolved around match times and arena schedules. The rush of performing in front of thousands isn't easy to replace. September 6, 2010 wasn't just another date on the calendar, it became a stark reminder of how far a star could fall. The charges read like a prosecutor's worst-case scenario: drug possession with intent to distribute, trafficking, burglary, grand theft. The man who once tossed anvils for sport and held championship gold was now making headlines for all the wrong reasons. The arrest painted a picture no wrestling fan wanted to see. Each charge told part of a larger story about addiction, struggle, and the desperate measures some take when the cheers stop and reality sets in. Controlled substances had replaced the adrenaline of competition. The man who once broke into matches with perfectly timed moves was now accused of breaking into buildings. This chapter of Jim's life served as a painful reminder of wrestling's darker side, how the business could lift someone to incredible heights but offer little guidance for the descent. The same intensity that made him a star in the ring was now working against him outside it, turning the Anvil's post-wrestling journey into a cautionary tale about fame's fleeting nature and the challenges of finding purpose after the final bell. The gas station incident stripped away the glamour of wrestling fame, revealing a man fighting battles far tougher than any ring match. The Anvil, who once stared down wrestling's toughest competitors, now couldn't look away from his own demons. When police arrived, they didn't find the calculated professional wrestler. He found someone lost in a haze of pills and confusion. His legendary strength now turned to desperate aggression. The courtroom in March 2012 painted a different picture than the arenas he once commanded. Instead of thousands cheering his power moves, he faced a judge's stern gaze. 6 months in jail wasn't part of any wrestling script, and his outbursts during sentencing only dug the hole deeper. Contempt charge was like watching a man who couldn't help but go for the count-out loss. Yet in the darkness, a glimmer of his wrestling family's loyalty shone through. WWE, despite all the bridges that could have been burned, didn't turn its back on one of its own. They stepped up twice, funding rehabilitation programs to help their former champion find his way back. It wasn't just business, it was recognition that behind the character of the Anvil was a human being worth saving. Those rehab attempts told a different kind of wrestling story. not one of good guys versus bad guys, but of a real man trying to pin his own demons to the mat. Each stint represented a kick-out at 2.5, a refusal to let addiction score the final fall. The company that had given him his greatest triumphs now trying to help him achieve his most important victory over himself. In these moments, wrestling's scripted drama gave way to raw reality. A man who'd once tossed anvils for show is now trying to lift the weight of his own struggles. For fans who remembered his power and glory, these headlines hit harder than any finishing move, reminding everyone that sometimes life's toughest matches happen outside the ring. Inside a quiet Florida home in the early hours of August 13th, 2018, wrestling's final bell rang for the Anvil. The scene his wife Elizabeth described to TMZ wasn't the explosive power moves fans remembered. Instead, it was hauntingly gentle. A simple trip to adjust the thermostat turned into wrestling's last unexpected twist. That odd dance-like movement Elizabeth saw wasn't part of any ring performance. Jim, who'd been taking medication for seizures, moved in a way that made his wife's heart stop. He hit the wall and dropped to the floor. She didn't hesitate. 911 call was immediate. Sometimes even the fastest responses aren't fast enough. The 4-inch gash they found told the cruel story of his final moments. The man who'd survived countless battles in the ring, been thrown around by wrestling's toughest competitors, taken down by a simple fall. At 63, the Anvil's strength couldn't save him from this last opponent. The revelation about early-stage Alzheimer's cast a shadow over even his final days. The disease that steals memories had been lurking, threatening to rob him of the very stories that made him a legend. County sheriffs ruled out foul play. That didn't make the loss any easier. Jim, father, husband, wrestler legend, had left the ring for the last time. No more anvil tosses, no more power slams, no more of that distinctive laugh that echoed through arenas. Just memories, frozen in time like photographs of a man who lived life as big as his in-ring presence. Hart legacy runs like a bright thread through wrestling's tapestry. Nowhere is it more visible than in Natalya's ring work. Every time she steps between the ropes, echoes of the Anvil live on. Same power game, those technical skills, even the way she carries herself. It's pure Hart dynasty, pure Jim spirit. Watch Natalya wrestle and you'll catch glimpses of her father. When she locks in the sharpshooter, she's not just using her Uncle Brett's move. She's honoring a family tradition that Jim helped build. The pink and black gear isn't just a fashion choice, it's a living tribute to the Hart Foundation's glory days. And her dad and uncle changed tag team wrestling forever. But it goes deeper than moves and colors. Natalya brings that same blend of power and precision that made her father special. She can throw opponents around the ring with anvil-like strength, then switch to technical wrestling that would make the Hart Dungeon proud. Like watching wrestling history evolve in real time, next generation Jim adding new chapters to the family story. In WWE's women's division, Natalya stands out not just for her skill, but her connection to wrestling royalty. Every time announcers mention her father or the Hart Foundation, keeping the Anvil's memory alive. Struggles later in life don't diminish what he built. They just make the story more human, more real. Through Natalya, Jim's influence on wrestling never really ended, it just transformed. The powerhouse who once tossed anvils for sport lives on through his daughter's power slams. The proud Hart Foundation member's spirit shows in every pink and black outfit she wears. The legacy of the Anvil didn't end on that August morning in 2018. It just found a new way to shine in the squared circle. Through the lens of cold statistics, Jim's career looks impressive enough. Those tag team titles, those headlining matches spanning decades. But wrestling isn't about numbers. It's about moments that stick in fans' memories, and the Anvil created plenty of those. That laugh, you can still hear it if you close your eyes. It wasn't just a character trait, it was Jim's exclamation point on every promo, every victory, every moment of triumph. In a business full of larger-than-life characters, he managed to stand out without needing fancy gimmicks. Just raw power, natural charisma, and that unforgettable laugh. Think back to WrestleMania 6, when victory came calling, or those legendary Hart Foundation matches rewrote what tag team wrestling could be. Each power slam, each devastating move told the story of a man who'd gone from tossing anvils at the Calgary Stampede to tossing opponents in wrestling's biggest venues. Jim's story isn't just about wrestling glory, it's about human struggle too. When the spotlight dims and the crowds go home, when the roar of thousands turns to silence, that's when some of life's toughest matches begin. His battles outside the ring remind us that even our heroes fight private wars we never see. From the Hart Dungeon to WWE stardom, from triumph to tragedy, Anvil's journey mirrors wrestling itself. Spectacular, dramatic, sometimes glorious, sometimes heartbreaking. His daughter Natalia carries his legacy forward now, proof that the stories we write in the ring can echo long after we're gone.
Next up, the $1 Million Man. What if I told you wrestling's most famous millionaire character was created for a wrestler who got screwed out of millions in real life? Ted DiBiase transformed from a respected technical wrestler into the $1 Million Man. But behind his arrogant character was a performer dealing with broken promises and political games. From his father's death in the ring to his controversial exits from both WWE and WCW, this is the untold story of talent versus politics. But Ted's story begins with tragedy that would shape everything about his approach to wrestling. July 2nd, 1969. The Lubbock Municipal Coliseum in Texas was packed with wrestling fans expecting another routine show. Iron Mike DiBiase stepped through the ropes for what would be his final match. In the crowd sat his 15-year-old adopted son Theodore, watching like he had dozens of times before. But this night was different. This night would change everything. Iron Mike collapsed in the ring during his match against Man Mountain Mike. Heart attack. Seven-time NWA World Champion Harley Race rushed to the ring and performed CPR, but was unable to save him. The man who had raised Ted since he was 7 years old was gone in an instant. Ted watched his father die doing what he loved most. The same ring that had given Iron Mike his livelihood had taken his life. Most teenagers would never want to see a wrestling ring again. Ted was not most teenagers. The trauma hit the family hard. Ted's mother Helen struggled with depression and alcoholism after losing her husband. She knew she had to get her son away from wrestling. She packed up their lives in Texas and moved Ted to Willcox, Arizona, to live with his grandparents. The plan was simple: start fresh. Keep Ted away from the wrestling world that had destroyed their family. But Ted couldn't escape it. He threw himself into football and eventually earned a scholarship to West Texas State University. He was a natural athlete with size and coordination that made coaches take notice. Ted excelled on the football field, earning recognition as one of the team's best players. The coaches thought they had found their next college recruit. Behind the football success, wrestling consumed Ted's thoughts. He watched matches on television whenever he could. He studied the technical aspects of the sport that had killed his father. His family noticed his obsession and worried about where it might lead. They had moved across state lines to get away from wrestling, but wrestling had followed them to Arizona. When an injury ended his football career in his senior year, Ted saw it as a sign. He dropped out of college to pursue the career that had been calling him since that night in Lubbock. The Funk family ran one of wrestling's most respected training facilities in Texas. Dory Funk Sr. had built a reputation for developing technical wrestlers who could work anywhere in the world. His sons Terry and Dory Jr. had become stars using the fundamentals their father taught them. When word reached them about Iron Mike's son showing interest in wrestling, they paid attention. Terry and Dory Jr. saw something special in the grieving young man when Ted finally made contact. They understood his motivation was different from other kids who wanted to be wrestlers. This wasn't about fame or money. This was about honoring a father's memory and proving that tragedy didn't have to define a family's relationship with wrestling. The Funks agreed to train Ted despite his family's concerns. The training became Ted's therapy. Every drill, every practice match, every technical lesson helped him process the grief that had been eating at him since that night in Lubbock. The Funk brothers taught him that wrestling could be done safely if you respected the sport and your opponents. They showed him techniques his father never had the chance to pass down. Ted learned that he could honor Iron Mike's memory by being better than his father ever was. Ted's natural athletic ability combined with his emotional drive created something special on the wrestling mats. He absorbed everything the Funks taught him about chain wrestling, submission holds, and ring psychology. The technical aspects of wrestling came naturally to him. But more important was his attitude. Ted approached training with a seriousness that impressed veteran wrestlers who visited the Funk facility. The other trainees noticed Ted was different. He wasn't there to play around or live out childhood fantasies. Wrestling was his way of dealing with loss and finding purpose after trauma. The intensity he brought to every training session separated him from other hopefuls who came and went. Ted was building the foundation for what would become one of wrestling's most technically sound careers. His family slowly accepted that Ted was going to wrestle whether they supported him or not. The move to Arizona had been meant to end his wrestling dreams, but it had only delayed them. The Funk brothers convinced Ted's mother that they would prepare him properly for a career that could honor his father's legacy instead of repeating his tragedy. This early loss shaped how Ted would handle every success and failure in his wrestling career. The politics, the broken promises, the controversial exits from major promotions would all be filtered through the lens of losing his father at 15. Wrestling had taken Iron Mike away, but it had also given Ted a way to process grief and build a future. Now, he had to prove himself in a business that showed no mercy to inexperienced wrestlers. Run. He developed the arrogant, rich character that would later make him famous, but in a more subtle way than his WWF version. His loaded black glove became his signature finishing move. Ted would pull the black glove from his tights to knock out opponents when the referee wasn't looking. The crowd hated the underhanded tactic, and Ted discovered he was a natural at making people hate him. Ted defeated Dick Slater to become Missouri State Champion in February 1978, only to lose the title to Dick Murdoch after a few weeks. The brief championship reign proved he could carry a title and draw money for promoters, even if the run was short. Promoters started calling other territories to book Ted for their biggest shows. Word spread that Ted could work with anyone and make them look good. The NWA territorial system allowed Ted to refine different aspects of his wrestling abilities. In Georgia, he endured one of wrestling's most legendary angles when the fabulous Freebirds gave him 4 pile drivers, 1 on concrete and 3 in the ring. The brutal beating was so convincing that audience members were crying, thinking Ted had been seriously injured. This demonstrated his commitment to selling an angle and his toughness in taking punishment for the sake of the story. Back in Mid-South, Ted's heel character reached new heights when he turned against the popular Junkyard Dog and formed the Rat Pack with Jim Duggan and Matt Bourne. The group's arrogant antics made them one of the territory's most hated acts. Ted's eventual feud with Duggan culminated in a loser leaves town match, showcasing his ability to work compelling storylines with former allies. His technical abilities impressed wrestlers who had been in the business for decades. Ted could chain wrestle with the best scientific wrestlers, but he could also brawl with the toughest street fighters. He studied videotapes of great wrestlers and incorporated their best moves into his own style. Ted became known as someone who could work any style required for a particular match. By the early 1980s, Ted had transformed from the grief-stricken teenager who trained with the Funks into one of wrestling's most polished performers. His technical skills were among the best in the business, but more importantly, he understood the psychology of professional wrestling. Promoters across different territories recognized Ted as someone who could headline their biggest shows. Ted had proven himself in the American territorial system, but the ultimate test of any wrestler's abilities lay across the Pacific Ocean. All Japan Pro Wrestling in 1983 was where American wrestlers went to prove they were legitimate or get destroyed trying. Ted entered AJPW that year and immediately faced the cultural barriers that had broken other foreign wrestlers. The matches were stiffer than anything in American territories. Japanese fans had no patience for American wrestlers who couldn't adapt to their style of wrestling. The language barrier created problems that went beyond simple communication. American wrestlers couldn't understand what their opponents were calling in the ring. They missed important cues from referees and ring announcers. Ted's first major breakthrough came on October 14, 1983, when he won the NWA United National Championship by defeating Jerry Lawler by forfeit in a tournament. This wasn't a consolation prize given to a foreign wrestler. Ted had to prove himself against legitimate Japanese stars to earn that championship. His title reign showed Japanese promoters and fans that he understood their wrestling culture and could carry storylines as a singles competitor. He lost the title to Michael Hayes on January 28, 1984, but the reign had established his credibility in Japan. 2 months after losing the championship, Ted faced personal tragedy when his mother, Helen Hild, died on March 4, 1984. The loss hit him hard, but wrestling had taught him to channel grief into motivation. His technical wrestling ability impressed Japanese wrestlers who were known for their scientific approach to the sport. He could chain wrestle with the best Japanese technicians, and hold his own in submission exchanges. His background training under the Funk Brothers had prepared him for exactly this type of wrestling environment. In August 1985, Ted formed a legendary partnership when Stan Hansen chose him to replace Bruiser Brody as his tag team partner. They immediately became PWF Tag Team Champions, creating one of the most successful foreign tag teams in Japanese wrestling history. Ted and Hansen complemented each other perfectly in the ring. Hansen brought the raw power and intensity that Japanese fans expected from American wrestlers. Ted provided the technical skills and wrestling psychology that elevated their matches beyond simple brawling. Their dominance reached its peak when Ted and Hansen won the 1985 World's Strongest Tag Determination League, finishing in first place with 7 points. This tournament victory showcased their ability to work with different styles and adapt to various opponents while maintaining championship-level performance. Japanese fans noticed Ted's willingness to take punishment and dish it out in return. American wrestlers who tried to protect themselves or work a softer style were rejected immediately by Japanese audiences. The physical demands of Japanese wrestling pushed Ted to improve aspects of his game that might have remained underdeveloped in American territories. He learned to work a stiffer style without injuring his opponents or himself. His stamina improved dramatically because Japanese matches often went longer than American territory matches. Ted developed a better understanding of crowd psychology in a completely different cultural context. Their PWF Tag Team Championship reign lasted nearly 2 years until they lost the titles to Jumbo Tsuruta and Tiger Mask on July 3, 1987. But Ted and Hansen regained the championship just 8 days later, proving their dominance wasn't finished. However, their second reign was cut short when they were stripped of the titles due to Ted leaving for the WWF. When Vince McMahon came calling in 1987, Ted was locked in talks with the NWA about his future. But McMahon made an offer that changed everything. Pat Patterson convinced Ted to sign by telling him about a gimmick that McMahon would give himself if he were to wrestle. The promise of a serious push and a character with real potential was too good to pass up. The World Wrestling Federation was expanding from a regional territory into a national entertainment company. McMahon needed characters that could work on television and appeal to mainstream audiences beyond traditional wrestling fans. He wasn't looking for just good wrestlers anymore. He wanted personalities that could carry storylines and sell merchandise. Ted had proven himself as a technical wrestler, but McMahon saw something else in him. He saw the perfect person to play wrestling's ultimate rich villain. Ted made a brief return as a babyface on May 15, 1987, at a house show. But the real plan was already in motion. On June 26th, he turned heel by attacking his tag team partner Sam Houston, setting up the debut of his new character. The $1 Million Man was the complete opposite of everything Ted had built his career on. For years, he had earned respect through technical wrestling and hard work in brutal territories. Now McMahon was asking him to become a cartoon villain who bragged about his wealth and looked down on everyone else. The transformation started with the wardrobe and backstory. Ted traded his simple wrestling gear for expensive suits and flashy jewelry. The $1 Million Man was billed as having multiple seasonal residences, including Palm Beach, Florida, Hyannisport, Massachusetts, Bel Air, California, and the Netherlands Antilles. The gold lame suits became his signature look. He wore designer sunglasses and carried himself like someone who had never worked a day in his life. Everything about the character was designed to make people hate him for having things they could never afford. Ted had to learn how to cut promos that were completely different from his previous wrestling persona. The $1 Million Man talked down to fans and wrestlers like they were beneath him. He bragged about his wealth and made it clear that he thought money made him better than everyone else. The character required Ted to be arrogant and condescending in ways that went against his natural personality. Virgil changed everything about how the character worked. The name was either based on NWA Booker Dusty Rhodes, whose real name was Virgil Runnels, or disputed by Bruce Pritchard depending on who you asked. Having a black bodyguard who was clearly being humiliated and treated poorly added racial undertones that made the $1 Million Man even more hateable. Virgil carried Ted's bags, shined his shoes, and took abuse from his boss in front of crowds. The relationship made Ted seem like someone who enjoyed having power over other people. The WWF offices gave Ted a stipend of petty cash to throw money around in public, effectively blurring the lines between fiction and reality. The vignettes were brilliant pieces of character development that aired during WWE programming. Ted would appear at restaurants, country clubs, and public pools where he would bribe people to do humiliating things for money. He made kids give up their seats at basketball games. He paid people to kiss his feet or bark like dogs. In the famous vignette where he kicked a ball away from a child, everyone who wasn't paid on camera was actually paid off camera, according to his autobiography. These segments made the $1 Million Man seem untouchable and morally corrupt. The catchphrase captured something that felt uncomfortably real about wealthy people. When Ted said, "Everybody has a price," it didn't sound like a wrestling catchphrase. It sounded like something an actual rich person might say about buying people's principles. His finishing move, the $1 Million Dream, was a rib on Dusty Rhodes' nickname, the American Dream. The $1 Million Championship belt was creative genius that solved a booking problem. Ted needed to seem important and championship level without actually winning a real title. The custom belt was presented as being more valuable than any official WWE Championship. The belt gave him something to carry and defend while keeping him away from the actual title picture. Within months, Ted had gone from being a respected technical wrestler to being the most hated person in WWE. The character was so effective that it completely overshadowed his wrestling abilities. The success created new expectations that would be tested when the biggest opportunity of his career finally arrived. The real test came when Ted tried to buy his way to the top. His first major championship angle involved attempting to purchase the WWF World Heavyweight Championship directly from Hulk Hogan. When Hogan refused to sell, Ted approached Andre the Giant with a different proposition. He would pay Andre to win the title for him. The plan worked better than anyone expected. On February 5, 1988, during the main event Y, Andre defeated Hogan under questionable circumstances that included the infamous evil twin referee debacle. But Andre's victory was just the beginning of Ted's master plan. After winning the championship, Andre announced he was surrendering the belt to Ted. The $1 Million Man had finally bought his way to wrestling's most prestigious title. For several days, Ted was actually billed as World Heavyweight Champion. He defended the title once against Bam Bigelow and appeared at 3 house shows as the recognized champion. The storyline felt real because Ted carried himself like a legitimate title holder. He had the belt, the booking, and the credibility that came with being presented as WWE's top champion. WWF President Jack Tunney destroyed Ted's championship dreams with a single announcement. Tunney declared that Ted was not the champion because he didn't win the title by pin or submission. Since Andre had surrendered the belt rather than losing it in competition, the championship was vacated. Andre's win was recognized, making it the shortest world title reign in WWF history. But Ted was left with nothing despite having possession of the belt. WrestleMania 4 was supposed to provide redemption through the tournament format. Ted was positioned as one of the favorites, and his path seemed designed for success. He defeated Hacksaw Jim Duggan in the first round and Don Morocco in the quarterfinal. His semi-final victory over Morocco was a wrestling clinic that reminded everyone why he had succeeded in territories in Japan before becoming the $1 Million Man. Ted received a bye to the finals because Hogan and Andre were double eliminated in their semi-final match. Andre later revealed that Ted had paid him to ensure Hogan didn't advance, adding another layer to the storyline about money-buying championship opportunities. Everything was falling into place for Ted's coronation as WWE Champion. The final match against Randy Savage should have been Ted's moment. The storyline logic was perfect, and Ted had the heat, wrestling ability, and character motivation to be a credible champion. But Hulk Hogan interfered to negate Andre's assistance, helping Savage win the championship. Once again, external factors had prevented Ted from capturing the title that seemed destined to be his. The Megabucks tag team formation with Andre felt like consolation booking for someone who deserved better treatment. Ted and Andre faced Hogan and Savage as the Mega Powers at the inaugural SummerSlam in 1988, where Hogan pinned Ted to end the feud. The match was positioned as a major storyline, but it moved Ted away from singles championship contention where he belonged. Ted's frustrations with his booking situation started affecting his performances and attitude backstage. He had done everything WWE asked of him as the Million Dollar Man character. His heel work was among the best in the company, and his wrestling ability was proven at the highest levels. Yet he kept getting passed over for championship opportunities that went to other wrestlers. The 1988 King of the Ring tournament provided some redemption after the WrestleMania disappointment. Ted defeated Brutus Beefcake, Ken Patera, Ron Bass, and Randy Savage to win the tournament and secure his first major WWF success. The victory maintained his credibility as a main event performer, but it wasn't the same as holding the WWE Championship that had been so close at WrestleMania 4. The near miss at WrestleMania 4 became the defining moment that haunted Ted's entire WWE run. He had been positioned perfectly to win the championship and had the skills to carry the title successfully. Wrestling fans and industry observers began speculating about whether backstage politics were preventing him from reaching his full potential. The pattern was becoming clear that Ted would be kept just close enough to the top to maintain his heat, but never allowed to actually reach it. Something else would have to satisfy his championship ambitions. The Million Dollar Championship became a creative solution born from his inability to secure the actual WWF Championship through conventional means, allowing him to maintain a championship-level presence without disrupting the main title picture. Ted commissioned the belt to be made with real diamonds and gold plating that cost about $50,000 to produce. In kayfabe, it represented $1 million in gold and diamonds. The craftsmanship was exceptional. The belt looked more expensive and prestigious than the actual WWF Championship that Hulk Hogan carried. Ted treated his custom title like it was the most important championship in wrestling. He polished it before every appearance and protected it like it contained actual secrets to his wealth. The Million Dollar Championship was created because Ted couldn't buy or win the WWF World Heavyweight Championship despite his character's wealth and schemes. The belt was mostly a prop to accentuate Ted's pomposity after he couldn't get the desired return on his investment for the real title. But Ted's presentation made it feel legitimate through sheer force of personality and commitment to the character. Ted's promos about his custom championship created an interesting situation where fiction and reality seemed to blur together. He claimed the Million Dollar Championship was worth more than any other title in wrestling because of its actual monetary value. Ted said other champions carried cheap metal and fake jewels, while his belt contained real wealth. The promos felt like Ted was shooting on the wrestling business and pointing out how artificial most championship belts really were. Fans started treating the Million Dollar Championship like a legitimate title, even though it had no official status. Ted defended it in matches and carried it to the ring like any other champion. It actually was defended on occasion. Ted outlasted sworn enemy Jake the Snake Roberts via countout at WrestleMania 6 in order to save his precious property. Crowds reacted to the belt like it mattered in storylines. The championship became real through crowd reaction and Ted's presentation, even though WWE never officially recognized it. Wrestling insiders understood the irony of Ted's situation perfectly. The man playing wrestling's richest character was potentially losing millions in real earning potential by not holding the actual WWF Championship. Main event champions received higher pay scales and better booking opportunities. Ted was generating massive heat and drawing money for the company while being denied the financial rewards that came with championship status. Ted's unique title history revealed something remarkable about his wrestling career. His initial reign as WWF North American Heavyweight Champion in 1979 in WWF was awarded, not won in a match. His 2019 WWE 24/7 Championship was acquired by purchase, not competition. Ted's only televised title win by pinfall or submission was regaining the Million Dollar Championship from Virgil. This pattern showed how his character's reliance on money and shortcuts had become reality throughout his career. The elaborate presentation of the Million Dollar Championship masked deeper problems with how WWE treated its most talented performers. Ted had proven himself in every wrestling environment, from territories to Japan to national television. His heel work was among the best in the company, yet he remained stuck in a character role that prevented him from reaching the top of the promotion. the custom championship became a symbol of creative limitations rather than creative freedom. Ted's singular achievement was holding 4 different singles championships in WWE without winning any of them in an official match. The $1 Million Championship, the disputed WWF Championship, the North American title, and the 24/7 Championship were all acquired through methods other than defeating an opponent cleanly. This unique distinction in wrestling history highlighted how his character had shaped his entire career trajectory. The championship represented the glass ceiling that even the most talented performers couldn't break through if backstage politics worked against them. Ted had everything needed to be a successful WWE champion: technical skills, character work, crowd heat, and proven drawing power. The $1 Million Championship gave him a consolation prize that looked impressive, but didn't change his actual position in the company hierarchy. The belt became Ted's legacy in ways that probably weren't intended when it was created. Wrestling fans remember the $1 Million Championship more than most legitimate titles from that era. The custom belt represented something unique in wrestling history, where a performer created his own championship and made it feel important through presentation skills alone. But Ted's career needed to evolve beyond the limitations that even his greatest creative success couldn't overcome. The formation of Money Inc. offered a new path forward through tag team wrestling. Tag team wrestling was where careers went to die in most wrestlers' minds. Singles stars who got moved into tag teams were usually being demoted or pushed aside for younger talent. Ted found himself in exactly this situation after his singles championship opportunities dried up. The $1 Million Man character had generated massive heat, but hadn't translated into the WWE Championship reign that seemed inevitable. WWE needed a new direction for Ted that would keep him relevant without threatening the established championship hierarchy. Mike Rotunda had been working as Erwin R. Shyster, a tax collector character who bored audiences with lectures about paying their taxes. The IRS gimmick was clever but limited. Rotunda needed a partner who could elevate the character and create storylines that went beyond simple tax jokes. Ted's $1 Million Man persona was the perfect complement to a tax collector. Rich guy meets government agent. Corporate greed meets bureaucratic power. The chemistry between Ted and IRS worked immediately because both characters represented things that regular people hated about authority figures. Ted was the wealthy boss who looked down on his employees. The hasty title switch came as a result of Road Warrior Hawk flunking a drugs test, creating an unexpected opportunity for Money Inc. The Nasty Boys were originally scheduled for the title shot that went to Ted and IRS instead. The team's success wasn't just about their character work. Ted's technical wrestling abilities complemented IRS's methodical style perfectly. Ted could work the exciting portions of matches while IRS controlled the pace and built heat through rest holds and heel tactics. The Legion of Doom feud showcased Ted's ability to work with completely different wrestling styles and personalities. Hawk and Animal were power wrestlers who relied on intensity and crowd participation. Ted had to adjust his heel tactics to work against opponents who were more popular with fans than most face teams. The contrast between Money Inc.'s corporate presentation and LOD's Road Warrior gimmick created natural storyline tension that translated into successful pay-per-view matches. Their attacks on Brutus Beefcake, and later their manager Jimmy Hart for being disgusted by their actions, led to Hulk Hogan challenging Money Inc. This setup created the storyline for their WrestleMania 9 match and demonstrated how Ted could generate heat that drew major stars into feuds. Their rivalry with the Natural Disasters required different skills from Ted as a performer. Earthquake and Typhoon were massive wrestlers who used their size advantage to dominate opponents. Ted had to find ways to make the team's heel tactics work against opponents who could simply overpower them in most situations. Money Inc.'s second and third championship reigns demonstrated their staying power as a drawing team. 2 of their 3 tag title wins did not take place on TV, continuing the unusual pattern of Ted's championship history, where his biggest victories happened away from television audiences. They weren't just a temporary pairing that got lucky with one title run. Ted and IRS developed genuine chemistry as partners who understood each other's strengths and weaknesses. The Steiner brothers' matches were crucial for Ted's development as a performer who could keep up with wrestling's changing landscape. Scott and Rick Steiner represented the new generation of athletic wrestlers who combined technical skills with impressive physical abilities. The $1 Million Corporation became Ted's platform to demonstrate his ability to build stars instead of just being one. Managing a stable of wrestlers required different skills than being a singles competitor or tag team partner. Ted had to scout talent, develop characters, and guide multiple wrestlers through storylines simultaneously. The corporate presentation fit perfectly with his $1 Million Man persona while giving him real power behind the scenes to influence careers. The stable included an impressive roster of talent that showcased Ted's eye for diverse wrestling abilities. IRS brought technical skills and heel psychology from their successful Money Inc. partnership. Bam Bigelow added main event credibility and athletic ability that few big men could match. Nikolai Volkov provided veteran experience and international appeal. Kama brought legitimate martial arts background and intimidating presence. King Kong Bundy offered old-school monster heel dynamics. Psycho Sid delivered unpredictable intensity and natural charisma. Tatanka contributed technical wrestling skills and a unique cultural presentation that stood out on the roster. Steve Austin arrived in WWE as a talented but generic wrestler who needed direction. The Ringmaster character was everything wrong with wrestling in the mid-1990s. Plain black tights, no personality, and a finishing move called the $1 Million Dream that put people to sleep literally and figuratively. Austin had legitimate wrestling ability from his time in WCW, but the Ringmaster gimmick buried everything interesting about him under corporate-approved blandness. Ted later claimed he saw Austin's potential and introduced him to opportunities that would help develop his character work and promo skills. The lessons Ted learned from years of character development were being shared with a wrestler who would eventually surpass all of his teachers. Austin's natural intensity and charisma needed the right presentation to connect with audiences, and working within the $1 Million Corporation provided that framework. Ted's involvement in the WrestleMania 11 main event with Bam Bigelow showed he remained relevant in WWE's biggest storylines. Managing Bigelow against Lawrence Taylor wasn't the most prestigious assignment, but it demonstrated that WWE still trusted Ted with important responsibilities. His work at ringside during the match helped make a celebrity versus wrestler contest more believable than it had any right to be. Austin's development under Ted's guidance included character work that planted seeds for everything that would make Stone Cold successful. The intensity and anger that would later make Austin a star were being refined during his time as the Ringmaster. The corporate-approved character was too limiting for someone with Austin's natural charisma and intensity, but Ted could see the potential waiting to be unleashed. The $1 Million Corporation started falling apart as members were reassigned to different storylines or released from the company. Ted watched wrestlers he had worked to develop get moved to roles that didn't utilize their abilities properly. The stable that was supposed to showcase his managerial skills became another example of how backstage politics could derail even the most promising concepts. Austin's departure from the $1 Million Corporation happened just before he would transform into Stone Cold Steve Austin. Ted lost the chance to guide one of wrestling's biggest stars through his career-defining character change. The timing was heartbreaking for Ted because he had invested significant time and effort into Austin's development, only to see other people get credit for his eventual success. The influx of former WWE stars like Hulk Hogan, Scott Hall, and Kevin Nash had created mainstream attention that WCW had never experienced. Ted's arrival should have been another major acquisition that strengthened their roster and added credibility to their programming. Ted served as the spokesperson for the NWO for 3 months, until Eric Bischoff joined the NWO and replaced him in that role. The demotion was the beginning of creative frustrations that would define Ted's entire WCW experience. His $1 Million Man persona remained popular with wrestling fans who remembered his WWE success. But Bischoff's creative vision focused heavily on the NWO storyline and the mainstream appeal of former WWE stars who were part of the main invasion angle. Eric Bischoff's approach to booking WCW programming prioritized quick storyline fixes and celebrity appearances that generated immediate ratings spikes rather than sustained character development. Ted wanted to rebuild his character gradually and create storylines that showcased his abilities as both a wrestler and a manager. The fundamental disagreement about creative direction created immediate tension between the two men. Ted's frustration with his reduced role in the NWO led to a confrontation that would define his WCW experience. As he later explained, Eric Bischoff doesn't know that much about wrestling. Eric took credit for the NWO, but that wasn't his idea. Originally, I was supposed to be the mouthpiece of the NWO. I just went to him one day and told him, I'm not just going to walk out there and be Hulk Hogan's Virgil. You hired me to be the spokesperson for this, so if that's not what I'm going to do, you can send me home. The arguments between Ted and Bischoff became common knowledge backstage as both men refused to compromise on their creative differences. Ted felt his experience and track record should give him more input into how his character was presented and used in storylines. Bischoff believed his position as head of creative gave him final authority over all character decisions regardless of individual wrestler preferences. The disagreements created tension that affected other wrestlers and backstage personnel who had to work around the conflict. After his NWO departure, Ted's success managing the Steiner brothers to WCW World Tag Team Championship Gold proved his abilities as a manager hadn't diminished.